Chapter 477. On Green Cliff Mountain, in the Grand Hall where all the soul jade slips of Yuan Hua sect's disciples were stored. The spacious hall was dimly lit, with only 2 eternal lamps hanging from the ceiling with 2 thin golden ropes emitting a faint light. A mountain breeze blew into the hall from outside, swaying the flame and blinking the shadows, as if there were countless ghosts wandering about in the hall. Inside the hall, numerous shelves carved out of green mountain rocks were placed neatly on top of them. Underneath each soul jade slip was a small wooden plaque, on which was written the name of the owner, as well as their position and seniority in Yuan Hua sect were written in small gold-plated characters. At the highest point of the innermost shelf was a palm-sized, pale golden soul jade slip, with a wooden plaque underneath it written with the name of Patriarch Yuan Hua. Originally, there were a few cells under Patriarch Yuan Hua's soul jade slip, but now, only 2 of them had a pile of broken soul jade slips, while the rest were empty. Only the wooden plaques hanging under the cells had pale golden characters written on them. Patriarch Yuan Hua stood in the shadow, his body shivering as he stared at the 2 broken soul jade slips. His eyes were filled with tears, and 2 lines of blood ran from the corners of his eyes all the way to his chin. Blood and tears kept flowing down his cheeks. The few empty cells were the soul jade slips of a few of Patriarch Yuan Hua's former direct disciples. Yuan Hua sect had gone through several dozens of periods, and the few direct disciples whom Patriarch Yuan Hua regarded as his own children, whom he loved even more than his own sons, had fallen in the battles with other immortal sects, as well as the battles with other itinerant cultivators. Every time one of his disciples died, Patriarch Yuan Hua would feel a sharp pain in his heart, as if a knife was twisting with it. In the end, only Daoist Qi, who was honest and steady, and Daoist Min, who was smart and capable, but a little narrow-minded. After spending several dozens of periods together, Daoist Qi and Daoist Min had become the bones in Patriarch Yuan Hua's marrow, the flesh in his heart. As Patriarch Yuan Hua's cultivation of cultivating his qi and mind had become better and better, he had buried this little bit of romantic feelings in the depths of his heart. Over the years, the relationship between master and disciple seemed to have faded. But, when he suddenly saw the 2 soul jade slips, which were broken into pieces, he suddenly realized that his heart was broken as well. The last 2 direct disciples were gone. The personal disciple whom he had painstakingly trained for dozens of periods, who had spent more time with him than his own son, was gone. They were adopted by Patriarch Yuan Hua, who was only a nascent divinity cultivator at that time. They were brought up in a miserable state, and when Patriarch Yuan Hua built Yuan Hua sect, the last 2 personal disciples who gradually built the sect, they were gone. The shattering of the soul slip was a sign that the soul would scatter and vanish into nothingness. Daoist Qi and Daoist Min, the last 2 disciples of Patriarch Yuan Hua, were gone. Do you know that I've successfully refined that upper-grade immortal sword? It is a 7th-grade immortal sword, and it is more than enough to make my name resound throughout Pyuyo heavenly realm. No one will dare to offend Yuan Hua sect anymore. Yuan Hua sect is about to, no, it is already the strongest immortal sect in Pyuyo heavenly realm. In the future, we will leave Pyuyo heavenly realm and spread Yuan Hua sect's prestige to the other heavenly realms. Do you know that the opportunity for Yuan Hua sect to prosper is right before our eyes? With Zhang Li's bloodline of ancient gods, Green Cliff Planet will definitely become one of the few blessed lands with immortal veins among all the heavenly realms. The current Green Cliff Planet cannot even support the cultivation needs of a mid-grade heaven immortal. In the future, as long as all the energy veins on Green Cliff Planet are condensed and refined into immortal veins by the ancient divine power, one Green Cliff Planet will be able to provide all the immortal energy needed for the cultivation of 10 gold immortals. As long as either I, or any one of you, become a gold immortal, I'll be able to bring you under the tutelage of that senior. Do you know that senior is a primordial immortal? He is a primordial immortal. If we can become the disciples of a primordial immortal, perhaps, no, we will definitely become the overlord of Yu Hua heavenly realm in the future. Those heaven monarchs and immortal monarchs of the celestial court will not even have the qualification to stand tall before us in the future. A bright future is right before our eyes. How could you die like this? Patriarch Yuanhua clenched his fists tightly and suddenly roared at the top of his voice, "Who gave you the courage to die like this? Without my permission, how dare you have your souls destroyed? How could he dare to die so cleanly like this? Not even a wisp of your broken soul was left behind, and I didn't even have the chance to search for your reincarnations. You, unfilial disciples." The air in the great hall suddenly became thick and heavy. Numerous invisible gusts of wind were twisting and turning in the hall like great pythons, producing strange howling noises. The great hall was shaking, and all the soul jade slips were trembling. A faint blood mist was seeping out of Patriarch Yuanhua's body, and a blood-red gleam that should never appear in his eyes was bursting out of his eyes. Patriarch Yuanhua's meditation technique, which he had cultivated for dozens of periods, had suddenly disintegrated. With the outbreak of the 3 separations and the birth of the 5 evils, the boundless resentment immediately attracted those heavenly demons who were hiding in the outer realms of the chaotic dimension. They were invisible and intangible, but possessed mighty divine abilities. Quietly, a wisp of fiend will fused with Patriarch Yuanhua's immortal soul. The blood-red gleam shrouding him grew stronger, and both his eyes, including the whites of his eyes, turned a frightening red. He clenched his fists tightly, and crackling noises could be heard coming from all the joints in his body. The 7th-grade immortal sword flew out with a threatening heatwave, and was caught in Patriarch Yuanhua's hand. An enormous amount of immortal energy was surging in his body. As the sword sensed the killing intent in Patriarch Yuanhua's heart, it could not help but let out a bloodthirsty cry. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps was heard coming from outside the great hall. Patriarch Yuanhua flipped his palm, and the immortal sword turned into a stream of flame and plunged into his forehead. The blood-red gleam shrouding him quickly retracted, and Patriarch Yuanhua's eyes regained their clarity. With hands clasped behind his back, he asked coolly, "Green Staff and Green Melon are here?" Just in time. Immortal Green Staff and Goddess Green Melon brought Patriarch Jiang Yun into the great hall. They walked quickly to the last shelf, and when they saw the 2 broken soul jade slips, Chi-Chi's body trembled. Immortal Green Staff dropped to his knees and howled, "Master, how could this happen? Grandmaster, wasn't Master in a secluded cultivation? How did this happen?" Patriarch Jiang Yun was so frightened that he dropped to his knees as well. He stared blankly at the 2 broken soul jade slips, which represented the souls of Daoist Qi and Daoist Min. His eyes were blank, and no one knew what was going through his mind. Laughing strangely, Patriarch Yuanhua walked slowly before Patriarch Jiang Yun, reached out his hand, and placed it on his shoulder. "Jiang Yun, what is the background of that disciple of yours, Wu Qi? Come, tell us in detail. Where did Wu Qi come from? Is he cultivating the energy unity technique that you taught him? Don't tell me that Wu Qi is able to fight against immortals with his cultivation base of nascent soul realm just by cultivating that lousy energy unity technique." Patriarch Jiang Yun cried out involuntarily, as if a thunderbolt had just struck his head. How is that possible? Ancestral Master? Could it be that the 2 ancestral masters, they were killed by Wu Qi? Immortal Green Staff sprung to his feet abruptly and roared, "Wu Qi? That scum who deceived his master and killed his ancestral master, he. Immortal Green Staff's eyes turned bloodshot as well. Suddenly, the corners of his eyes cracked, and 2 streams of blood tears rolled down his cheeks. Patriarch Yuanhua smiled faintly and said in a deep voice, "It was me who sent Chi'er and Min'er to kill Wu Qi. I even gave them the primordial gold talisman given by a senior to protect themselves. After all, Panga continent is a place where crooks and dragons mix together. It is not an easy place for them to go." Laughing, Patriarch Yuanhua gave Patriarch Jiang Yun a heavy slap on the shoulder and said with a sigh, "I never thought that Chi'er and Min'er would die just like that. Mo Wan and the others who came with them, none of them were spared. Their souls were all destroyed, and not even a broken soul was left behind." Immortal Green Staff's eyes went wide as he snapped, "Was it really Wu Qi who did it?" Goddess Green Melon cried out in alarm, "Why did Patriarch ask Master, Uncle Master, and others to kill Wu Qi? The couple exchanged a glance, then turned to look at Patriarch Yuanhua at the same time. Patriarch Yuanhua flipped his hand, revealing a soul jade slip lying in his palm. A startling crack could be seen running across it. Obviously, the owner of the soul jade slip had suffered a very serious injury, which was why such a crack could be seen. Patriarch Yuanhua said coldly, "This soul jade slip belongs to Wu Qi." When Qi'er and Min'er's soul jade slip shattered, his soul jade slip also cracked. Clearly, the person who killed Qi'er and Min'er is Wu Qi. Taking a deep breath, Patriarch Yuanhua said bluntly, "The reason why I want to kill Wu Qi is because of Zhang Lu. I want Zhang Lu to become a member of Yuanhua sect. A person who will never betray Yuanhua sect. As long as Zhang Lu stays on Green Cliff Planet for a few periods, the planet will definitely become a spirit planet filled with immortal veins. At that point of time, it will not be difficult for her to break through the realm of Gold Immortal." Immortal Green Staff was taken aback, while Goddess Green Melon said straightforwardly, "Ancestral Patriarch, if this is the reason, there is no need to." Patriarch Yuanhua interrupted Fairy Green Melon with a muffled snort, then said coldly, "Regardless of whether it is right or wrong, this is the result. Qi'er and Min'er are dead, Wu Qi must die as well, and all those related to him must die as well. Zhang Lu must marry Yuexin and become a true core disciple of Yuanhua sect, a core disciple who will never leave us." Pressing his palm heavily on Patriarch Jiang Yun's shoulder, Patriarch Yuanhua cried out sternly, "Tell me, what is the background of Wu Qi? Where did you recruit him?" The immense immortal pressure made Patriarch Jiang Yun gasp for breath. With a blank expression, he raised his head and told Patriarch Yuanhua about the existence of Myriad Immortals planet. Patriarch Yuanhua's eyes flickered with a bright gleam, while Immortal Green Staff and Goddess Green Melon had their expressions flickered. Never in their wildest dreams did they expect that Patriarch Jiang Yun would have such a fortuitous encounter. In a remote place like the minor Heavenly Circle realm, he actually managed to find a priceless planet left behind by two great apocalypses. "I see." Patriarch Yuanhua bowed his head and laughed coldly. "Well then, Green Staff, Green Melon, bring some men with you. All the cultivators on Myriad Immortals planet must join Yuanhua sect unconditionally. Take control of their nascent divinities, and kill anyone who dares to resist. Capture all the members of Great Yan's Imperial clan alive and bring them to Green Cliff Mountain." A cruel smile emerged at the corner of Patriarch Yuanhua's mouth. "I'll use the lives of all the members of Great Yan's Imperial clan to force Zhang Lu to marry Yuexian. Let's see if this little girl can still escape from my scheme," said Patriarch Yuanhua in an insidious voice. Patriarch Yuanhua stretched out both hands and clenched his fists tightly. Suddenly, he threw his head back and burst into tears. "Qi'er, Min'er, watch me. I'll definitely avenge you." Chapter 478. Amidst a forest on the island, Princess Zhang Lu sat cross-legged on a thin straw mat. A small incense burner was placed next to her, from which a wisp of green smoke was drifting out, driving away all the mosquitoes in the surroundings. Peppermint and Angelica were carefully kneeling next to Princess Zhang Lu, looking curiously at Ma Yi, who sat cross-legged in front of them. Ma Yi was clad in an ordinary green Taoist robe, and he looked just like any ordinary cultivator that could be found everywhere in the world of cultivators. He even carried a scabbard on his back, in which there was a lower-grade flying sword of poor quality. He nodded at Princess Zhang Lu, then fished out a palm-sized jade slip and carefully placed it before Princess Zhang Lu. "His Majesty and all the courtiers have left Myriad Immortals planet." Ma Yi's first words made Princess Zhang Lu frown. "Everyone?" Princess Zhang Lu asked. "Everyone. His Majesty, the concubines in the imperial harem, the princes, the families of all the courtiers, and the disciples of all the immortal sects of Great Yan, have begun to move out 3 years ago." Ma Yi grinned and said, "Now, Great Yan has found a planet in Yuhua heavenly realm that is inhabited by mortals and has no immortal sects, and has seized the power of one of them. 3 years ago, not long after Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Lu left Myriad Immortals planet, Great Yan began to move out. Under the control of many civil and military officials of Great Yen, the move did not alert anyone from White Cloud Immortal Sect. When Ma Yi came to Green Cliff Planet to meet Princess Zhang in secret, all the properties of Great Yen had been moved out. They had taken away all the people and things that could be taken away from Myriad Immortals Planet. Princess Zhang took the jade slip and scanned it with her divine will, memorizing all the information in it. The information was very detailed, including the location of the planet where Great Yen was located, as well as the situation in all aspects. After memorizing all the information, Princess Zhang clasped her palm and shattered the jade slip. What about the other 5 dynasties? Princess Zhang asked after a moment of silence. Ma Yi grinned, nodded, and said, just like Great Yen, the other 5 dynasties have left Myriad Immortals Planet. Taking a deep breath, Ma Yi said, it's not a good feeling to live under someone else's roof. Now that all 6 dynasties have their own heaven immortals, they have enough overall strength to cope with the storms in the outside world. So, why should we still covet what little foundation we have on Myriad Immortals Planet? He smiled proudly and said, His Majesty said that no matter where we go, we can build a foundation that is millions of times larger than Myriad Immortals Planet. Myriad Immortals Myriad Planet is, and, of Myriad Immortals of. By planet, Myriad Planet. After a brief moment of pondering with a frown on her face, Princess Zhang asked, what is Grandpa trying to do? Ma Yi rubbed his hands. As Princess Zhang Li's confidant, he naturally knew what Yen Dan was trying to do. After a moment of hesitation, he looked at Princess Zhang and said, His Majesty said that since we can't live freely, we should live wildly. We will always be under the control of others, and we don't know when we will be crushed to death. So, we should build a great cause before we die. Ma Yi laughed dryly, then lowered his voice and said, His Majesty said that after being the emperor for over 2,000 years, the people in the dynasty are all ordinary people, and he's tired of it. Since we are going to go crazy, we should go crazy. Why don't we do something to the celestial court? His Majesty said, why can't he be the great celestial emperor who sits high above the celestial court? Princess Zhang frowned, twitched her lips, and said disapprovingly, with Great Yan's current overall strength, how dare he covet the throne of the great celestial emperor? Heaven Immortals, Gold Immortals, Primordial Immortals. How many people are in between? Without the cultivation base of Primordial Immortals, who dares to covet that throne? Ma Yi smiled bitterly, shook his head, sighed, and said, His Majesty said that since we are already here, we should try our best. Whether we succeed or not is another matter, but we should live well. Also, His Majesty has sent out a great number of men, preparing to. Before Ma Yi could finish his words, the green smoke rising from the incense burner next to Princess Zhang flickered abruptly. A tiny wisp of smoke spread out and transformed into a green smoke screen. Lights and shadows flickered within it, revealing the scene around the small island. High up in the sky, Zhi Yuexin and a skinny, wretched and cunning-looking man were stealthily casting a restrictive spell, trying to break the restrictive formations Wu Qi had deployed around the small island. Ma Yi turned to look at Princess Zhang in surprise, his eyes filled with questions. This was Green Cliff Planet, the base of Yuanhua sect. As a disciple of Yuanhua sect, who dared to disturb Princess Zhang like this? If it were an outsider, it would be considered as a provocation to Yuanhua sect. If it were a fellow disciple of Yuanhua sect, it would be even more unreasonable. Such an action was not honorable, nor could it be considered as a friendly gesture between fellow disciples. Princess Zhang Li's face darkened abruptly. She slapped the ground with both palms and sprung up into the sky, riding a 5-colored cloud and flying up into the sky. She recognized Zhi Yuexin. She was the person who harassed her a few days ago, and was nearly killed by her heavenly thunder. She rushed straight out of the defensive circle of the formation and came before the 2 men, scolding coldly, What are you trying to do by sneaking around? Both Zhi Yuexin and the man were taken aback. A ball of bright light burst out from Zhi Yuexin's body to protect her, while the man spun in midair. A clump of purple smoke rose from behind his back, within which was a soul shadow shaped like a loach swaying. In just a blink of an eye, the man had fled several miles backward. Clang! Suddenly, Catfish Flood Dragon appeared before the man with a blink, carrying the huge hammer in her hand. The huge hammer came smashing down with a whistling sound. The man gave a strange cry, then pulled out a tiny dagger and slashed it across the air. Surprisingly, the tiny dagger did not seem to be in a disadvantageous position when it collided with the hammer. Sparks flew from the dagger, and a deep cut was left on the hammer, nearly causing half of the hammer to fall off. Both men staggered a few steps back at the same time. "Hey, little guy, you have such a strong strength!" Catfish cried out in surprise. The man gasped for a few breaths, then chuckled and said, "Big fish demon, I think your body is weak, and your strength is too little, right? TSK, why are you shouting about fighting and killing in such a beautiful scene? Hee, I think your hammer is hollow, right?" The man's words were filled with hostility, which made Catfish Flood Dragon's eyes go wide. She was about to strike again in a fit of rage. Suddenly, a large cloud of water rose from the surface of the ocean down below, as Lord Xianqing rushed up into the sky with over 1,000 huge sea demons. The bodies of these sea demons, who were still absorbing the essence of the sun and moon in the formation a moment ago, were shrouded in a layer of strong silver light, which made them look even more mighty and extraordinary. Carrying huge weapons of the same size, they gave off a mighty air. Zi Yuexin kept shaking his head. With a cheeky smile on his face, he looked at Princess Xianglu, who looked angry, and said, "Miss Zi Xian, why do you have to scare me? I don't have any evil intention in coming here, I really don't have any evil intention. We met a few days ago, and I can't forget you, Miss Zi Xian. I'm always thinking about you." Upon hearing Zi Yuexin's words, Princess Zhongli's face turned even stiffer and colder, as if a layer of frost could be scraped off her face. "Who are you? How dare you keep thinking about me?" she asked coldly. She pointed her finger out, and a 5-colored cloud flickered on her fingertip. Princess Xianglu was going to summon the heavenly thunder to beat Zi Yuexin into a daze, just like what she did that day. Right at this critical moment, an immortal pressure suddenly pressed down from the sky, and Patriarch Yuanhua's voice was heard coming from a very far distance, "Zi Xian, I've decided that you will marry Yuexin. This is a good fate, and you must not miss it. In the future, your child will be the next sect leader of Yuanhua sect. It's decided. When I send someone to invite your grandfather, father, and all your relatives to Green Cliff Planet, I'll let you marry each other." Princess Xianglu was suffocated by the tremendous immortal pressure. Although her fingertip was flickering with bright lights, she still could not summon the heavenly thunder. When Zi Yuexin saw that Princess Xianglu could not move, his lust was aroused. He came before Princess Xianglu and reached out his hand to touch Princess Zhongli's face. While doing so, he smiled and said, "Miss Zi Xian, a talent like you should never be held back by a common man." Princess Zhongli's face turned purple with anger. She tried her best to circulate the divine energy in her body, but the gap between her and Patriarch Yuanhua was just too huge. There was no way she could break free from the suppression of his immortal pressure. Patriarch Yuanhua intended to force Princess Xianglu. His immortal pressure came from afar, pressing down on Princess Xianglu like a great mountain. Seeing that Zi Yuexin's hand was about to touch Princess Zhongli's, Lord Xianqing gave a furious roar and threw the halberd out, which transformed into a purple thunderbolt and shot towards Zi Yuexin. "Take your filthy hand off me, you thief!" Lord Xianqing bellowed furiously. Zi Yuexin did not give Lord Xianqing another look. A great force came from the void and smashed Lord Xianqing's halberd into pieces. Behind him, the bodies of over 1,000 sea demons, who had grown to a certain level, exploded at the same time. Their flesh and blood fell from the sky, but were blocked by the restrictive spells automatically generated by the island's defensive formation. Then, a great number of thunderbolts came shooting from all directions and turned the flesh and blood into smoke. Lord Xianqing coughed up a mouthful of blood as well, and was thrown into the ocean by the great force. He did not float up for a long time. Catfish cursed angrily. She picked up the hammer and smashed it toward the man. Noticing that Catfish Flood Dragon's overall strength was on par with his, the wretched-looking man grinned and teased her with words while waving the little dagger, aiming it viciously at Catfish Flood Dragon's vital spots. Catfish's body was huge, so her movement was a little slow. On the other hand, the man was dodging around like a loach with oil smeared on it. His dagger produced a sizzling noise as it nearly hit Catfish's body a few times. Zhi Yuexin smiled complacently. His hand was about to touch Princess Zhang Li's tender face, which looked like a blooming flower in spring. Right at that moment, Ma Yi stealthily soared into the sky on a cloud. When he saw that Zhi Yuexin was trying to violate Zhang Lu, his eyes went wide with anger. With a blink of his body, he sprung to Zhi Yuexin's side like a mad tiger. A beam of red light flashed, and suddenly, an 18-feet-long machete appeared in Ma Yi's hand. With a flash, it sliced Zhi Yuexin into two halves. A ghostly howl was heard coming from the machete, as a dozen bloody fiend shadows squeezed out of it, grabbed Zhi Yuexin's soul and dragged him into the machete. In just a blink of an eye, Zhi Yuexin's soul was devoured by the machete. How dare a mere nascent divinity cultivator be so arrogant and domineering? I'm also a heaven immortal now. Ma Yi threw his head back and laughed wildly, then grabbed Princess Zhang Lu and fled into the island. Catfish Flood Dragon left the man and quickly followed Ma Yi into the small island. Lord Xiansheng, who was thrown to the bottom of the ocean, did not need anyone to remind him. When he saw Zhi Yuexin was killed, he quickly plunged into the island through the channel Wu Qi had specially prepared for him. XNR. A miserable howl rang out in the void, as Patriarch Yuan Hua suddenly appeared out of nowhere, his body glinting with a strong blood-red light. Chapter 479. Feeling the wounds on his body, Wu Qi smiled happily. Every time he passed by a city on the prairie, a fiend's shadow would flash out of his body. The celestial fiend puppet casually transformed into the appearance of a mortal, walking slowly towards the city together with Wu Qi. As an elite of scouting office, Yan Bugui did not need to do anything to stir up his emotions. His tears rolled down his face just a little bit slower than Wu Qi's. Elder Brother Wu, I didn't expect that we would meet again here alive. Where have you been all these days? When Patriarch Yuan Hua personally picked up the cudgel and smashed the warmth in Wu Qi's heart, the part of Wu Wang's experience and knowledge that had fused with Wu Qi's soul was finally awakened. The part of Wu Wang's soul was no longer Wu Qi's appendage, but had truly become a part of Wu Qi. Wu Qi and Yan Bugui hugged each other and wept bitterly. The ox cart had slowly come to a stop, and the youths leaped down from the pile of hay, looking curiously at Wu Qi. There was no distinction between good and evil, no justice and evil, no mercy and compassion, no tender affection. It was just a plain truth: the strong would win, and the weak would be like those people killed by Wu Qi. Even their bones could be used to beat drums. With the overall strength, Supremacy 3 Flame could slaughter Miao Hu and the other officers and soldiers of Yu Dynasty, exchanging their heads for bloody contribution points, spirit herbs, and immortal items. With the overall strength, Feng Qingya could openly lead an army to commit treachery and wait quietly outside Myriad Herbs Hall, waiting for the last lucky man to appear. While walking forward in a daze, Wu Qi suddenly recalled Wu Wang's words. In the end, Wu Qi was just a young man who was in his early 20s. Even though he had killed countless people, he was still full of longing and hope for the world. If anyone showed him even the slightest bit of kindness, he would respond enthusiastically. Therefore, he was filled with admiration for Patriarch Jiang Yun, and he was filled with gratitude for Patriarch Yuan Hua. Apart from these celestial fiend puppets, Wu Qi also left one in Anhe City to protect, or rather, to keep an eye on Lao Ai. The entire Euphoria Heavenly Palace was handed over to Lao Ai, and that celestial fiend puppet could serve as the liaison between Lao Ai and Wu Qi. Even with Lao Ai's oath, Wu Qi was still worried about Lao Ai. It was always good to keep an eye on him. There are no wild beasts that are willing to provoke a fierce tiger in the forest. Because ferocious tigers were cruel and vicious. If you provoked them, they would kill you. Therefore, the ferocious tigers could roar proudly in the mountains and forests. That was the prestige of generations of ferocious tigers smeared with blood. It was the same for human beings. Human society was like a mountain, and every single person was like a beast in the forest. If you don't want to be eaten, you have to be a fierce tiger in this forest. With the overall strength, Feng Qinggu could do whatever she wanted without any scruples. Even if Wu Qi was just an innocent passerby, she could still order him to be killed. Yan Bugui grabbed Wu Qi's hand and pulled him into the village. Wu Qi stared blankly at him, blinked his eyes, and turned to look around. It was a sunny day, and it was not the middle of the night, and he did not see any ghosts. Obviously, the young man running toward him was the leader of Great Yan's scouting office, Yan Bugui, an imperial relative of Great Yan. This was a dark forest where the strong preyed on the weak. Here, there was only one kind of people who could survive, heartless people. Step by step, Wu Qi walked forward with his eyes narrowed and a smile on his face. Zi Xian, it will take me over 3 years to get back to Green Cliff Planet. Daoist Qi and Daoist Min are dead, and their soul jade slips are broken. Patriarch Yuan Hua will definitely kill you as soon as possible. Wu Qi walked forward step by step, his blood dripping to the ground. He murmured to himself, I can't make it back in time. You can only rely on yourself. If you can escape, I'll kill Patriarch Yuan Hua to avenge you. You can't escape, and if anything happens to you, I'll definitely wipe out everyone in Yuan Hua sect. Thank you, Patriarch Yuan Hua. Wu Qi chuckled. On this Pangu continent, the strongest would win. On Pangu continent, Wu Qi was walking step by step across a boundless grassland. Wu Qi rushed before Wu Qi and gave him a tight hug, then brought his mouth close to Wu Qi's ear and whispered, I'm Hubugue now, the Hubugue whose hometown was destroyed by the flood, and who came here to settle down. Our village is called Little Leaf Village. 2 years ago, it was destroyed by the flood, and all the people in the village were killed. Remember, Little Leaf Village is located 4,000 miles northwest of Zhongning City, in the valley of Leaf Mountain. I've been here for over a month. Wu Qi brought his mouth close to Yan Bugui's ear and whispered, apart from you, who else is there? There happened to be a village on the side of the road. The pain on Wu Qi's chest and shoulder was very severe. He took a deep breath and gave the village a glance, then continued walking forward. Right at this moment, an ox cart came along the dirt road that led to the village, dragging a cart full of straw. A few burly young men were seen sitting on top of the tall pile of straw, talking and laughing. This grassland was the territory of Zhong Province. As long as he could get to Zhongning City, the administrative center of Zhong Province, he would be able to follow the map given by Supremacy 3 Flame and head to the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. According to the Scroll of Stealing, there was a stream of innate yang energy in the dark abyss, and it was what Wu Qi needed the most right now. Step by step, Wu Qi walked forward, feeling the severe pain that kept coming from his body. Yet, he was smiling cheerfully. There were still over 4,000 miles before he reached Zhongning City, and Wu Qi planned to finish the journey on foot. This was a trial for Wu Qi, a comprehensive examination of himself. Or, in other words, a trial for himself. With one arm dangling from his shoulder, swaying like a broken hemp rope, Wu Qi murmured under his breath, Patriarch Jiang Yun, don't let me down. If you obey Patriarch Yuan Hua's order, holding Great Yan's imperial clan hostage to force Zi Xian to marry you, then there will be no White Cloud immortal sect under the heaven. I'll kill every single one of your clan members. Yan Bugui lowered his voice and cried, His Excellency Su Qin is personally commanding the army, and he is the one who found out the information about Little Leaf Village. The first batch of scouting office that infiltrated Pangu continent consisted of 1,000 men. Damn it, the travel fee to come here is too expensive. Wu Qi turned to look at those young men, and he was struck dumb instantly. In addition, Reverend Li Yang would be visiting Anhui City in a few years, seizing the foundation of this land of 1,000,000 miles in circumference. Wu Qi did not plan to spare Reverend Li Yang easily. Even though he knew the map of the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean, there were still many things that he urgently needed from Reverend Li Yang. Therefore, the two celestial fiend puppets who served Taoist Yun Zong had to stay in Greenwood Mountain. There was no mercy, no tenderness, no justice, and no kindness. Anxiety was torturing Wu Qi's heart. He was worried about Princess Zhang Li's current situation, whether Great Yan would be implicated, and whether his good friends, such as Lu Qingfeng, would be in danger because of this incident. He suddenly realized that he already had too many concerns. In this world, he had too many things that he couldn't let go. Now that he had picked them up, he could not let them go. Therefore, Wu Qi's heart was throbbing with pain, as if it was being burned by a raging flame. Step by step, Wu Qi walked past one city after another, and then one village after another. The young man blinked his eyes rapidly as he ran towards Wu Qi. The wound on his chest had been slightly treated, and the broken bones and muscles had been regenerated. However, Wu Qi did not pay any attention to the rest. His chest was a mess, with dirty blood dripping down one drop at a time. He did not deal with the broken arm. Instead, Wu Qi just wrapped a dirty white cloth around his shoulder, then continued walking forward with a swaying gait. With the overall strength, Reverend San Lu could force Hidden Heart to move out of the temple where he had lived for several hundred years. Gradually, the staggering pace became stable. Wu Qi's steps became as precise as if they were measured by a ruler. Each step was of the same size, and he walked straight towards Zhongning City in a straight line. Each step was firm, as if each step was going to leave a deep mark on the surface of Panga continent. Among the young men on the haystack, a particularly burly young man sprung up abruptly, somersaulting and landing on the ground. Laughing out loud, he rushed towards Wu Qi and said, "Wu, elder brother Wu, why are you here? Heaven bless me, you have escaped from the flood as well. How did you get yourself wounded like this? I won't let the people around me fall into such a dangerous situation again. Zhang Lu is the woman I love, and I won't let anyone have the courage to covet her, and everything around me." Wu Qi stuck out his chest. Vaguely, when he walked, he looked like Wu Wang. With the overall strength, Patriarch Muji and Arhat Wrath could invade Anhui City and make this piece of land belong to the immortal sect. I love this damned world. Looking at the sky, Wu Qi suddenly laughed and said, I love this damned world. But, what made him feel worse was not the wounds, but Wu Qi's heart. Taoist Qi had been ordered to kill him for the innate divine ability inherited from Princess Zhang Li's bloodline, which could turn something rotten into something magical. The blatant act of seizing by force had once again brought Wu Qi face to face with the real world of immortal cultivators. He had left the energy-rotting ghost mushroom and bone-rotting and corpse worms to the celestial fiend puppet. Wu Qi was preparing to give Reverend Li Yang a surprise. As long as he was here, the surprise would definitely appear. Master. Wu Qi repeated Wu Wang's name under his breath, carefully recalling every word Wu Wang had told him. With the overall strength, Patriarch Greenheart and the others could kill and loot at Wulinqing Su Immortal Pass, and even set up unspoken rules to distribute the loot. The wounds on his body were very painful. After traveling for over 2 months, Wu Qi finally saw the lofty city wall of Zhongning City on the horizon ahead of him. With the overall strength, Wu Qi could plot against Euphoria Heavenly Palace and seize their foundation in Anhui City. After a long while, Wu Qi nodded and said, It's true, I really love this place. In the world of immortals, the strongest would win. Along the way, Wu Qi had released all his celestial fiend puppets to these cities. The only instruction he gave these celestial fiend puppets was to survive in these cities, and develop their overall strength and power. They could do whatever they wanted, as long as they kept developing themselves and waiting for Wu Qi's call. Wu Qi squeezed his eyes, and suddenly tears rolled down his cheeks. He hugged Yen Bugue with one arm and cried out, Brother Bugue, I finally get to see you again. Boo-hoo, why did you come here? In my heart, I really miss all of you. Chapter 480. The village was really small, surrounded by pastures and farmlands. On both sides of a dirt road that was less than half a mile long, there were some randomly built wooden houses and thatched cottages. These were the only buildings in the village. Looking into the distance from the spacious spaces between the houses, there were some houses and barns scattered around the pastures and farmlands. However, the heart of the village was the less than 200 houses on both sides of the dirt road. Wu Qi followed Yan Bugui on the muddy road. When he was walking slowly along the road alone, he didn't notice the wind and rain outside. No matter if it was a puddle of sewage or mud, cow dung or dog poop, he would step on it. But now, Wu Qi noticed the mud on the dirt road, and felt that walking on the mud with his bare feet was not a good feeling. A flock of hens, led by a rooster, slowly walked over from the other side of the road. The crown-crowned rooster raised its head proudly, like a human monarch patrolling its territory. Its eyes swept across Wu Qi with disdain, not even pausing on Wu Qi for a second. Wu Qi walked past the proud rooster. Two hens clucked and flapped their wings as they ran past him. Their wings brushed against Wu Qi's bare calves, giving him a sense of life. The energy in his body, which had been dormant for over 2 months, began to flow again. The powerful green and water energies, which contained a strong life force, kept surging into his body. Wu Qi's external injuries still looked horrible and hideous, but the internal injuries in his body were healing at an incredible speed. His lungs, which had been severely damaged, were itching. This was the regenerating of new lung tissues. The itch made Wu Qi want to cough, but he forcibly stopped himself from doing so. His ribs were still full of cracks. A few sneezes or coughs at this moment would be fatal. Why torture himself? Yan Bugui greeted the people in the village with a smile on his face. The people here were as simple as the soil in the ground. They were gentle and quiet, and their humble bodies contained a tenacious heat. Wu Qi could sense the life force in their bodies, including a few old men who were sitting in the front yard, twisting hemp ropes. However, it was as strong as the life force in his body. This village is not bad. Wu Qi praised. Yan Bugui's mouth twitched and he scolded in a low voice, "Someone doesn't see it that way." The two of them walked to the end of the street. Under a large jujube tree, there was a thatched cottage that had clearly been built not too long ago. It was still emitting the rich natural fragrance of soil and straw, standing right next to the trunk of the jujube tree. The big jujube tree was surrounded by a circle of stones filled with soil, forming a circle that looked like a flower bed. Su Qin, whose hair was as messy as a chicken's nest, was squatting on top of a stone, holding a chipped clay bowl in his hand and drinking porridge made from corn residue with a long face. Su Qin's clothes were ragged, made of sackcloth, the most common cloth worn by mortals on Pangu continent. No one knew if it was because he was bitten by a dog or some other reason, but his trouser legs were riddled with holes, and there were 2 large holes on his shoulders. His flesh was exposed everywhere, revealing his fair skin and his body that did not have much muscles. Wu Qi laughed, pointing at Su Qin. Su Qin raised his head up abruptly and stared at Wu Qi's disheveled appearance for a long time. Only then did he recognize who this man, who was missing an arm, was. He let out a strange cry, threw away the clay bowl, covered his face with his hand, and ran into the cottage, slamming the door behind him. While laughing, Yan Bugui pulled Wu Qi to the door and kicked it open. He pointed at Su Qin, who was sitting on a wooden stool in the hall, rolling his eyes and grumbling non-stop, and said, "Old man, why are you hiding? Is there anything else that you can't see?" Laughing and laughing, Wu Qi came before Su Qin, bowed deeply and said, "Long time no see, old mister." Su Qin twitched his lips and breathed out a long sigh. He pointed at Wu Qi's broken arm and asked, "I thought you looked ugly enough. Why did you lose an arm?" Tsk, if Zi Xian saw this, she would be very sad. Waving his intact arm indifferently, Wu Qi smiled and said, "Don't worry, it can be reattached at any time. I just wanted to keep this broken arm to help me think through some things. Now that I've thought it through, when I'm in a good mood in the future, I can regrow it." It's not a difficult task. Sitting on a wooden stool next to Su Qin, Wu Qi began to tell Su Qin everything that had happened to him during this period of time. He told him everything, including how Yuanhua sect was plotting against him, how they were coveting Princess Xianglu, and the property he had acquired in Anhe City. Su Qin frowned. Su Qin frowned. He pondered for a long time before gently clapping his left hand. A whirlwind suddenly emerged from the ground, from which came a short young man. He dropped to one knee respectfully before Su Qin and said, "Greetings, Prime Minister." Su Qin waved his hand and said coolly, "Go back and inform His Majesty about the changes in Yuanhua sect. If Princess Xianglu is fine, help her leave Green Cliff Planet. If Princess Xianglu has been harmed by them, ask the few old fellows who stayed there to think about how to wipe out Yuanhua sect for revenge." The short young man answered. With a spin, he transformed into a whirlwind and sped away. Patting his ragged pants, Su Qin turned to Wu Qi with a dry smile and said, "It's done. Just like what you thought, it's meaningless to send this news back. It will take me over 3 years to go back, and everything will be settled by then. But at least, we have to make this move." Wu Qi nodded and said, "With a few old misters there, I can be at ease." Although his words sounded nice, Wu Qi kept staring at Su Qin with a pair of shifty eyes, sizing up the holes on Su Qin's clothes from top to bottom. Su Qin's face turned blue with anger. He twitched his mouth and turned his head away, ignoring Wu Qi. Wu Qi refused to let Su Qin off the hook. Intentionally or unintentionally, he kept asking Su Qin how he ended up like this. But Su Qin just clenched his teeth and refused to answer. How could he explain to Wu Qi? Yan Bugue was amused by the scene, and quickly told Wu Qi about Su Qin's embarrassing story. Su Qin was the chief commander of the 1,000 elites Great Yan sent to infiltrate Panga continent. When Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu left Myriad Immortals planet to reinforce Yuanhua sect on Green Cliff planet, Su Qin had already set off for Panga continent with Yan Bugue and the others. This was the first step of Great Yan Dynasty's conquest, and they were the vanguard scouts of Great Yan Dynasty's invasion. In order to cooperate with this operation, Yan Bugue and the other elites of Scouting Office had taken the initiative to disperse the beast souls they had fused with since they were young, and abolished the internal energy cultivation technique they had been cultivating since they were young. They only relied on mystic medicines to preserve their strong muscles and bones, as well as the strength they had tempered. Su Qin had transcended his heavenly tribulation and attained the cultivation base of Heaven Immortal. After he arrived at Panga continent with 1,000 elites, he immediately gathered information and found all kinds of excuses to spread Yan Bugue and the others to various cities and villages in Zhong province. For example, Yan Bugue had taken the identity of a refugee from a small village that had been completely destroyed by a flood, and had taken root in this peaceful village. But Su Qin was unlucky. He had used a mystic technique to suppress all his strength, and was now no different from an ordinary old man. Originally, Su Qin thought it would be easy for him to make a living on Panga continent with all the talents and knowledge he had, and he was a talented person who could support the entire world. Therefore, he could travel around, instructing Yan Bugue and the others in their spying work, and gathering all kinds of information at the same time. Mingling in the streets was the best way to find all kinds of sources of information. Therefore, Su Qin disguised himself according to his over 2,000 years of life experience. For the first time, he disguised himself as a teacher, preparing to teach in a city in Zhong province. Little did he know that Yu did not have the occupation of a teacher at all. The sons of the wealthy and noble clans were taught all kinds of knowledge by the great oracles of the Directorate of Celestials, but how could ordinary people have the time to learn those complicated scripts? After suffering a heavy blow, Su Qin disguised himself as a traveling physician for the second time. He was a peerless genius, and he had a very strong attainment in the field of medicine, so he could even do things like open abdomen and dissection. But the people on Panga continent never knew what a traveling physician was. If they were sick, the oracles of the Directorate of Celestials would give them medicine, and there was no need for an unlicensed traveling physician like him. Therefore, Su Qin clenched his teeth and picked up a bamboo pole, hanging the pretense of being an ironclad fortune-teller, and prepared to deceive the ordinary people with his glib tongue to earn some money. However, the business of fortune-telling was also monopolized by the Directorate of Celestials. Su Qin was nearly caught by the great oracles of the Directorate of Celestials in Zhongning City. Fortunately, he was fast enough to slip out of the city. Is there a fourth time? Upon hearing Su Qin's embarrassing story, Wu Qi laughed so hard that his stomach hurt. He quickly asked Su Qin about what happened these days. Su Qin breathed out a long sigh, then turned to Wu Qi with a sad face and said, "The fourth time was the day before yesterday. I disguised myself as a traveling Taoist, and found a few rich children with good innate talents near Zhongning City. I wanted to take them as my disciples, and settle down in their homes. But..." Su Qin clenched his jaw and said, "When the people on Panga continent heard that I'm an immortal, they immediately reported it to the government of Diyu. In order to catch me, who might be an immortal cultivator, they sent an army of 8,000 soldiers to besiege me." That's an army of 8,000 soldiers. Don't they have to spend money to eat and drink? Wu Qi looked at Su Qin with a pitying look. The smile in his eyes was so obvious that anyone could see it. Wu Qi breathed out a long sigh and said, "Panga continent is completely different from outer heavenly realms. Immortal cultivators rarely enter the cities, as they would be killed by the soldiers of Yu dynasty. It is not that easy to take root on Panga continent." With a flip of his palm, Wu Qi produced a dozen drops of Ganoderma immortal spirit liquid, wrapped them in xian bing, and gave them to Su Qin. "Old mister, this is the essence of the spirit liquid left behind by a Ganoderma immortal after he failed his tribulation. Every drop can save a life." After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi suddenly slapped his thigh and said with a smile, "If you are talking about sneaking into Panga continent, I do have a good plan. And He City will come in handy." Chapter 481. Wu Qi, Su Qin, and Yen Bugue were struck dumb when they heard the jarring sound of the clapper, which was obviously made from a bamboo joint. They had never encountered something like this before. Although the sound of the clapper was jarring, it was not mixed with any murderous intent. Instead, it was filled with a sense of laziness. None of them knew what it meant. Suddenly, someone cried out from outside the courtyard, "Brother Hu, are you there? Someone from the government is here. Quickly gather at the entrance of the village." Wu Qi turned to look at Su Qin. Su Qin waved his hand and said, "I'm not going. I'm an old homeless man whom Brother Hu Bugue picked up in the wilderness. I'm seriously ill and have yet to fully recover. How could I have the time to meet the government?" Shaking his head, Su Qin twitched his lips and said with a lingering fear, "This Panga continent is too strange. I've had a few encounters with the government, and each time, I was chopped down by a sword. I don't want to see them again." Shaking his head, Wu Qi rose to his feet and followed Yen Bugue out of the courtyard. As his fake nascent soul was shattered by the primordial gold talisman, as long as he retracted his aura, no one would be able to tell that he was an immortal cultivator. At most, they would think that he was an unlucky and seriously wounded patient. Yen Bugue was even more straightforward. His beast soul had been released, and all his internal energy had been destroyed, leaving him with only a handful of physical strength. Therefore, he did not have to worry about anything else. Both men hurried to the entrance of the village, where several hundred villagers had already gathered under a large locust tree. An officer clad in a bronze armor, followed by a dozen soldiers, was standing on top of a boulder together with a low-ranking official, who wore a green hat and a green robe, looking down at the villagers condescendingly. Next to the boulder, an official clad in a green robe and a small hat was feebly knocking on a bamboo clapper, producing a jarring noise that hurt people's ears. After a while, when he saw that no one else came out from the village, the officer gave the low-ranking official a look. The green-clothed official smiled and bowed to the military officer. He puffed out his chest and called out to the villagers below, "My fellow villagers, it's good news. The punishment court of Zhong province is looking for more soldiers, and this time, our village has been allocated 10 soldiers. The villagers were in an uproar, and the eyes of some of the young people immediately lit up. The green-clothed official said with a smile, "Everyone knows that the punishment court's punishment army is a good job. Their salary is much better than those combat soldiers in the military court, and their food and drinks are all top-notch. Each of these 10 soldiers will be given a large ingot of silver as a settlement allowance." There are only 10 places. Yan Bugui quickly gave Wu Qi a look and asked in a low voice, "Is the punishment court recruiting soldiers because of that matter?" Wu Qi nodded his head, implying that Yan Bugui had guessed the cause of the matter. Just now, when Wu Qi told Su Qin about his experience in the past few days, he mentioned the Union of Myriad Immortals, and the bounty offered by the Union of Myriad Immortals to kill several punishment armies sent by the punishment court in Zhong province. Supremacy 3 Flame alone had killed nearly 2,000 punishment army soldiers, and together with the soldiers from the other squads, the punishment court of Zhong province would need at least 10,000 soldiers to replenish their army. If each village had a quota of 10 soldiers, it meant that they would be recruiting soldiers from over 1,000 villages at the same time. Looking at the commotion in the crowd, the green-clothed official smiled again and said, "Everyone, you have to know that joining the punishment army is a great opportunity for you to reach the sky in a single bound. You will be able to cultivate the body tempering technique secretly passed down in the army, and if you can achieve some success in your cultivation base, it goes without saying that you will be able to strengthen your body. When you retire from the army and return to the village, TSK, the village will surely prosper. If you make a meritorious service and get promoted to a general, perhaps one of you will be conferred the title of Marquis in the future, and you will have the status of a Marquis for generations to come." The green-clothed official was eloquent, as he kept exaggerating the benefits of joining the punishment army. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and several dozens of young men from the villages rushed out at the same time. "Your Excellency, we are willing to join the punishment army." Wu Qi frowned slightly. At the same time, Su Qin's voice came into his and Yan Bugui's ears, "Bugui, go. Join the punishment army." Without hesitation, Yan Bugui stretched out both arms and parted the villagers in front of him. "Your Excellencies, I, Hu Bugui, am also willing to join the punishment army. My family is ruined, and I have nothing but strength. I'm willing to fight for a better future." The officer nodded satisfyingly. His sharp gaze swept across Yan Bugui and those young men, then he pointed his finger at Yan Bugui, who was the strongest among them, and whose muscles could be clearly seen. "This man, you are Hu Bugui, am I right? Come, find a rock and lift it up." Yan Bugui tied the hemp rope tied around his waist, then strode over to a 6 feet square rock that weighed approximately several thousand kilograms under a large locust tree. He bent down, gripped the edges of the rock tightly with both hands, and gave a loud roar. His face turned purplish-red from the exertion. A series of cracking noises came from the joints of his body. The ground slightly shook, and the huge rock was lifted up by Yan Bugui. He slowly straightened his arms and lifted the rock high above his head. Chi-Chi, who was standing next to him, fell silent. Then, several hundreds of villagers cried out in praise, "Bravo!" Wu Qi turned to look at those villagers with a smile on his face. A few of them were strong and beautiful, as hot as the wild roses in the fields. Their gazes were fixed on Yan Bugui's body like flames. All of a sudden, one of the girls shouted, "Brother Hu, good job. Wow, you have such great strength." Yan Bugui laughed as he walked around with the rock in his hand, then threw it forcefully to the ground. A loud boom rang out as the rock smashed into the ground, creating a huge pit about 1 foot deep, and sending mud flying over 10 feet away. The officer clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Good, good. You are Hu Bugui, right? Good, with this innate divine strength, you will have a bright future in the future. Wonderful. I never thought I could find a brave man like you today." Without needing to say anything, the officer made the decision on the spot. Yan Bugui was now one of the new recruits of the punishment army. On the spot, a fist-sized silver ingot was given to Yen Bugue as a reward. It was the settlement allowance for Yen Bugue. A wooden plaque made from hardwood was given to Yen Bugue, which was the proof of his identity as a new recruit. The officer told Yen Bugue frankly that he would bring the wooden plaque to the neighboring village, Wanhu village, and meet up with the new recruits from the other villages. Then, they would rush to the punishment court of Zhongning City and report for duty. In other words, Yen Bugue still had 3 days to deal with his personal affairs. In fact, there was nothing much for him to deal with in this village. In front of so many villagers, Yen Bugue handed over the settlement allowance to the village chief of this village, asking him to take care of his house and farmlands during the period of his enlistment in the army. The house was painstakingly built by Yen Bugue over the past few days, and the fields were also painstakingly cultivated by him. He was a homeless refugee whose village had been destroyed, and he had no relatives at home, so this arrangement was reasonable. The village chief gladly agreed to Yen Bugue's request. Wasn't it just to clean up the house and not let the farmlands be left empty? With this silver ingot in hand, what could be difficult for him? The manpower of the village was worthless, and this silver ingot was more than enough for the villagers to take good care of Yen Bugue's house and farmlands for 10 years. Laughter and cheers could be heard coming from the entrance of the village. The remaining few dozens of young men were wrestling with each other, competing with each other on some skills such as drawing bows and shooting arrows. It took them nearly an hour to select the remaining 9 new recruits. After handing out the settlement allowance and the wooden plaque, the officer and the green-clothed official brought a dozen of their subordinates, mounted their mounts, and rode along the main road to the next village. Suddenly, there were 10 new recruits in the village. The villagers were so happy that they danced with joy, except for those young men who failed to be selected. Wu Qi and Yen Bugue mingled in the crowd, listening to the excited discussions of the villagers. The salary of the punishment army was very high. The annual salary and grain income of each soldier was almost equal to the annual income of 20 families. Apart from Yen Bugue, the families of the other 9 young men who were selected would immediately live a good life. All the soldiers of the punishment army would cultivate the secret body-strengthening technique of the human army, and would possess a strength far beyond that of an ordinary human being. When these young men retired from the army and returned to the village, with the protection of these powerful soldiers, the village would be able to live a peaceful life for several decades. Be it wild beasts or natural disasters, nothing would be a problem for these young men who possessed superhuman strength. Of course, if some of them could be promoted to an officer, or even be conferred the title of a marquis, as the green-clothed official had said, they would bring even greater benefits to the village. Perhaps, this small village, where most of the villagers were related to each other, could develop into a small town like the village of 10,000 households, with a population of several tens of thousands of people living together. The white-haired old village chief had already begun to excitedly recall the time when his grandfather was still alive, when the village once recruited new recruits. That time, it was unknown where the central state had sent troops, but a small village had provided 50 new soldiers at once. Although in the end, only 3 wounded soldiers with broken arms and legs returned to their hometown, relying on the strength of these 3 soldiers, the small village with a population of just over 50 families had developed into a village with over 300 families. The old village chief concluded excitedly that this was the blessing of the ancestors, which had given the village such a good opportunity. Neither Wu Qi nor Yen Bugue said a word. With a faint smile on his face, Wu Qi pulled Yen Bugue towards the cottage at the end of the road, getting further and further away from the excited villagers. These villagers only saw the benefits brought by joining the punishment army. How could they understand the sorrow of those dead souls who were killed by Supremacy 3 Flames Flaming Thunder? Even Wu Qi himself had killed 20,000 soldiers led by Feng Qingya in Qingsu Immortal Pass. Were the relatives of those soldiers not as excited as the villagers when they sent them into the army? Wu Qi raised his head and looked at the sky, not saying a word. He began to perfect the plan that he had just come up with, how he could make use of Anhe City to help Su Qin and Yen Bugue. Since he had bumped into Su Qin and Yen Bugue here, he would have to come up with a good plan to deal with Lao Ai. When they returned to the cottage, Yanbugue's words nearly made him choke with anger. Prime Minister, can you support yourself on Panga continent when you ask me to join the army? Chapter 482. Early in the morning, Yanbugue packed a small bundle, then boarded an ox cart together with the recruits from the other 9 villages, heading towards the village of 10,000 households, which was 30 miles away. On the ox cart, the cheerful voices and laughter of the new soldiers were connected together. Their mood was like the morning sun in the sky, bright and resplendent. Only Yanbugue was sitting on the shaft of the cart, smiling as he turned and waved at Wuqi and Su Qin. Wuqi waved his only arm and greeted Yanbugue with a smile on his face. With both hands tucked under his sleeves, Su Qin squatted on a rock by the roadside like an old farmer, staring blankly at the rising sun. After a long while, he breathed out a long sigh and said, "This is a dangerous journey. That little fellow better not be targeted by those people from Myriad Immortal Alliance, or he will not be able to survive even if he has 100 lives. Only great dangers can bring great opportunities," said Wuqi in a deep voice. "How can there be such an easy and peaceful thing under the heaven?" Wuqi tightened the bandage on his broken arm, then said coolly, "I'm leaving now. I need to find that tiny thread of fortune of mine." Su Qin rose to his feet, his mouth crooked as he murmured, "I'm leaving too. I need to take a stroll around and keep an eye on everything. It's not easy for those kids to come here, and I'm the only one in charge, so I need to take care of them from time to time. TSK, I don't believe that I can't make a name for myself in Panga continent without even a single copper coin with me." He clicked his tongue complacently and said with a cold grin, "What a glib tongue." Su Qin, humph. He held his head up proudly, clasped both hands behind his back, and walked towards the south. In a few villages several thousands of miles away, Yanbugue and his elite scouting officers were lurking. The morning breeze blew gently across Su Qin's body, fluttering his ragged burlap clothes, making him look like the wings of a burnt crow. Wuqi gave Su Qin a look and said in a deep voice, "You have to be careful as well. This place is not peaceful. I hope you can live until 3 years later." Su Qin's figure froze for a moment, then he nodded. Without looking back at Wuqi, he tapped his foot on the ground, and his figure abruptly darted out a dozen miles away. Smiling faintly, Wuqi raised his head to look at the morning sun and slowly walked towards the north. He walked very slowly, but with each step he took, he could cross dozens of feet. The ground under his feet slid quickly, and before long, Wuqi had already traveled thousands of miles. Using Zhongning City as the coordinate, Wuqi carefully avoided the cities and villages along the way, heading in the direction of the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. Panga continent was vast and boundless. With the escape art Wuqi had used, it took him more than 2 months to cover half of the distance. Traveling day and night had exhausted Wuqi's mental strength. Finally, after crossing a desert filled with bottomless quicksand, Wuqi found a grassland with lush water plants and stopped. Sitting lazily with his back against a boulder, Wuqi leaned against the side of a road, quietly watching the people coming and going on the road that ran through the entire grassland. The reproduction ability of the human race was extremely strong. Although Panga continent was constantly expanding, the human race seemed to have filled up the entire continent. At least, up until now, except for those forbidden lands where humans could not survive, Wuqi had not found a place without the existence of human beings. The grassland had a circumference of over 100,000 miles, and the road itself was tens of thousands of miles long. Towns and villages were densely packed on both sides of the road, and countless merchant caravans and pedestrians were passing through it. Wuqi lay on the side of the road, regulating his breath and restoring his energy while admiring the expressions of the pedestrians on the road. Their joy, anger, sorrow, and joy, their every move, every word, and every word. These humans were humble and insignificant, and did not possess any mighty power. But, they were thriving and expanding their people on this magical land. From these people, Wuqi sensed an enormous life force that faintly merged with the Tao of heaven and earth. Wuqi sat on the side of the road for 3 days and 3 nights. When he was in a state of meditation and sensed the enormous life force hidden in the bodies of the mortals, Wuqi suddenly felt the ground beneath his feet tremble. It was as if Panga continent had become a living being, and the tremble was its heartbeat. A vast and boundless life force that made Wuqi feel a terrible terror was being released from beneath the ground and spreading into the surroundings. The life force had always been there, but when Wuqi sensed the endless life force in the bodies of the mortals, he suddenly saw the purple life force rising from the ground and spreading into the surroundings. The purple life force had blanketed the entire Panga continent, fusing with the starlight energy essence sprinkled down from the sky and turning into a vast, hazy, yellow mist that covered an unknown area. The deep, muffled heartbeats kept ringing in Wuqi's ears. Gradually, his heart began to beat along with the heartbeats. When the purple life force fused with Wuqi's body, he felt an itchy sensation, and the serious injury Wuqi had deliberately ignored healed rapidly. In just the blink of an eye, before Wuqi could stop the strange change, the wound on his chest had healed, and his skin was smooth and clean as if he had never been injured. When Wuqi woke up from this wonderful enlightenment, his broken arm had magically grown back. Now, only the part below the elbow had not recovered, and half of his arm had grown back from the elbow to the shoulder in just a few breaths of time. And, the strength of this new arm was a few times stronger than his intact arm. It was purely the strength of his fleshly body, without the enhancement of any natural energy. Wuqi sucked in a cold breath and looked up at the sky. He seemed to have vaguely understood what was going on with the cultivation technique of the human race. Just as he was lost in thought, a hunchbacked old man, dressed in ragged clothes, carrying a bamboo basket filled with worthless common medicinal herbs, and carrying a sickle in his hand, was walking crookedly along the main road towards him. The old man had a very hunchbacked back, and the meatball on his back was almost as big as a camel's hump. His eyes could only stare at the ground, and he could not even look straight ahead. He could only see the ground 3 to 5 steps in front of him. Old, skinny, and hunchbacked, his grayish-brown skin was covered with age spots. He was an old man with 1 foot in the grave and 1 foot in the grave. He slowly walked on the main road, humming an extremely simple song that gave people an incomparably ancient feeling. The trembling voice drifted out along with the wind, startling Wuqi, who was sitting on the ground in a daze. Wuqi took a glance at the old man, who was carrying a large bamboo basket on his back, and breathed out a soft sigh. He seemed to have found a cultivation technique that was even more miraculous than the dragon transformation script. At least, the dragon transformation script could not regenerate Wuqi's broken arm in such a short time. In just a short moment, Wuqi had come to the conclusion that if someone could freely control this endless purple life force, his body would never be destroyed when he stood on the ground. Just like the earth giants in the Western mythology. As long as they stand on the ground, they will have endless strength. Wuqi smacked his lips. The hunchbacked old man walked past Wuqi with trembling legs. His waist seemed to be very sore. After taking a few steps past Wuqi, he stopped, pressed both hands on his waist and hammered it. He coughed a few times, turned to Wuqi, and said with a sigh, "I'm old and useless. When I was young, people said I could carry a mountain and walk on my back, but now, I'm really old." Wuqi was taken aback. He did not expect that the old man would talk to him. He smiled, nodded at the old man, and said with a serious expression, "You're so old, why are you still traveling around? You should stay at home and enjoy the life of leisure." The sun hung high in the sky, sprinkling its scorching rays down onto the ground. The hunchbacked old man was soaked in sweat, and beads of sweat rolled down his chin, splashing a few tiny water stains on the dry dirt road. The old man panted heavily, shook his head, and said with a sigh, "How can I stop when my descendants are so disappointing? Enjoy the life of leisure." Sigh. The old man sighed, shook his head, and continued walking. Wuqi looked at the old man silently, shaking his head as well. Wuqi rose to his feet, and when he was about to continue his journey towards the northern ocean, a rapid clatter of hooves came from behind him. At first, the clatter was quite far away, but soon, it was getting closer. Within the span of 2 breaths, the clatter was at least tens of miles away. Wu Qi turned his head abruptly and saw a group of ferocious cavalrymen, riding on a strange beast that looked like a buffalo, but had a pair of sharp horns and a body full of green scales. It was a beast with the nature of wind, and was running wildly along the road. The total number of cavalrymen was over 1,000. Each of them was clad in heavy scale armors, and their faces were covered with thick metal masks. Not even a little bit of their skin and flesh was exposed. On both sides of the saddle of the over 20 feet long buffalo were weapon bags made of leather, with 8 feet long coiling dragon halberds of the same color. The leading cavalryman was holding a 30 feet long flagpole, on which a large blood-red flag was fluttering in the air. All the pedestrians and vehicles on the road backed away in fear, fearing that they might get in the way of these cavalrymen and suffer an undeserved disaster. However, the hunchbacked old man had poor eyesight, and it seemed that he had some problems with his hearing as well. He turned his head and looked around blankly, but could not find anything wrong. Through the vibration coming from under his feet, he knew that something dreadful was approaching. "Damn old fogey, get lost." The cavalryman arrived before the old man. The leading cavalryman waved a long whip made from animal tendons, which was as thick as a toddler's fist, and swung it towards the old man. The long whip produced a shrill noise in the air, and swung towards the old man's face like a poisonous snake. The surrounding pedestrians cried out in shock. Even a rock would have a crack on it, let alone this old man. Wu Qi frowned. His body swayed and darted towards the old man, leaving a few afterimages in the air. He grabbed the old man's waistband with one hand, pulled him up, and rolled away from the road. The snake-like whip brushed past Wu Qi's body, shredding the burlap cloth on his shoulder. "Humph, you dodged pretty fast." The leading cavalryman snorted in a deep voice. He did not stop pestering Wu Qi, but continued to lead the cavalrymen and keep running. Wu Qi held the old man in his arms and rolled to the side of the road, shaking his head in embarrassment. He did not use any magical power or magic, but only relied on his strong physical strength to make this set of movements. Therefore, he looked a little embarrassed when he dodged the whip. The hunchbacked old man coughed violently, rolled his eyes, and said with a long sigh, "The moral of the world is not as good as it used to be. How could there be such disrespect for the elderly in the past? Look at me now, I'm just one step away from death. Can't you let me have a good death?" Wu Qi shook his head. He avoided the eyes of the pedestrians on the road, took out a few silver ingots, and stuffed them into the old man's hand. After that, he turned around and left without saying a word. The old man suddenly reached out his hand and grabbed Wu Qi's sleeve. Chapter 483. Rip. Wu Qi's tattered linen sleeve was grabbed by the old man, and the entire sleeve was ripped off. Turning around with a bitter smile, Wu Qi looked at the hunchbacked old man and asked, "Why did you grab me? I don't need to thank you for saving my life. You're an old man, and you were killed in public. I can't stand it, that's all." The hunchbacked old man coughed a few times and threw away Wu Qi's sleeve. Trembling, he walked to Wu Qi, lowered his voice and sighed, "Young man, well done. Nowadays, it's rare for an old man like me to show mercy. TSK, your luck hasn't been good lately." Raising his eyebrows, Wu Qi looked at his broken arm and said indifferently, "Of course my luck isn't good. If I was lucky, I would have lost an arm." Reaching out his hand, the old man grabbed Wu Qi's hand and dragged him to a bumpy rocky area on the grassland beside the road. He said in a low voice, "Come, follow me. Sigh, young man, you should be more courageous. Are you still afraid that an old man like me, who only has one breath left, can do anything to you?" Wu Qi rolled his eyes a few times, then let the old man pull him to the rocky area about a mile away. From afar, there were dozens of natural rock pillars, each about 70 to 80 feet tall. Hundreds of rocks of different sizes were scattered on the grassland, forming a barrier that looked like the foundation of a house. A few groundhogs, unique to the grassland, were standing on top of a big rock, staring at Wu Qi and the hunchbacked old man. The hunchbacked old man panted and pulled Wuqi to the rocky area, avoiding the pedestrians who were shouting and discussing the scene where Wuqi saved someone under the whip. Walking around a few big rocks, the hunchbacked old man pulled Wuqi and sat down on a grassland with a circumference of several feet. The hunchbacked old man leaned against the ground, and finally, he could look at Wuqi's face. The hunchbacked old man let out a deep laugh. He shook his head and said, "The space between your eyebrows is black, and dark energy is rising from the back of your head. Your luck has been very bad recently. What's a broken arm? You almost lost your life, didn't you? In just a few months, you almost lost your life, didn't you?" Wuqi shivered. He gazed deeply into the old man's eyes, which had more white than black, and said in a deep voice, "Old man, if you want to say something, just say it. I can see that you're not an ordinary person. If you have anything to say to me, just say it." The hunchbacked old man rubbed his palms and shook his head with a wry smile. A young man who speaks so directly is not cute at all. Sighing, the old man shook his head and said, "However, at least he still has some respect for his elders. He is still a very good young man. Unlike those bastards nowadays, all of them have forgotten their ancestors and don't respect the elderly." "Sigh, what's going on?" Wuqi looked at the old man and didn't say anything. The old man shook his head, grabbed the bamboo basket on his back, and rummaged through those worthless herbs for a while. Finally, he fished out a 1-foot-long, 3-inch wide, flat bone plate that was pale golden in color. The bone plate was as smooth as a mirror, and the golden bone was naturally covered with complicated patterns. The pale purple patterns were inlaid with specks of silver light. Wuqi suddenly felt that the patterns on the bone plate were very familiar. Looking at the old man with a strange look, Wuqi raised his head and looked at the sky. The sun was shining brightly, and no stars could be seen. However, Wuqi was sure that the patterns on the bone plate were part of the map of the stars in the night sky. The old man waved his palm, and the patterns on the bone plate twisted and changed along with the changing light and shadow, as if there really were hundreds of stars moving on the bone plate according to some kind of orbit. This is... An idea suddenly flashed in Wuqi's mind. This seemed to be the skeleton of some kind of strange beast, the beast of fortune and misfortune. The scroll of stealing only briefly mentioned about this strange beast, because the inheritor of the scroll of stealing did not think that this beast of fortune and misfortune was useful. Therefore, the description of this beast of fortune and misfortune was very simple. The old man grinned. He gently stroked the bone plate and said in a low voice, "Young man, you have saved this old man today. Therefore, this old man will use this bone plate of the beast of fortune and disaster, which I have kept for half of my life, to predict your future good or bad luck. If it's a bad omen, you'll have to find a place to hide. If it's a good omen..." The old man pondered for a while, then Wuqi asked, "If it's a good omen, then what?" The old man grinned, shook his head and said, "Look at your unlucky aura, how can it be a good omen?" Wuqi nearly fainted because of the old man's words. He fiercely glared at the old man and said in a deep voice, "Then, please give it a try, old man." No one liked to be told that they were going to be unlucky, and naturally, Wuqi didn't like to hear such unlucky words either. The old man grinned, stroked the bone plate, and began to recite a spell with a strange voice. The surrounding light suddenly turned dark, and a cold air emerged from the ground. The scorching sun in the sky had lost its power, and the cold air began to drill into Wuqi's body through his pores. The cold air was so sticky that it felt like a solid substance, and it made Wuqi shiver. Hastily, he circulated his innate energy to resist the invasion of the cold air. A deep ghost howl was heard coming from the depths of the ground. A foot-tall grayish-white whirlwind, bringing with it an eerie ghost aura, emerged from the ground underneath the old man's feet, swirling and spreading in all directions. All of a sudden, the green grass on the grassland withered, as if all the life force and water in their bodies were sucked out in an instant. The ghost howl made the innate nascent soul in Wuqi's body restless. Fortunately, he had the divine flame of order to stabilize his mind. He glanced around, and a faint purple and green gleam shot out from his pupils. With that, the ghost howl and the cold air no longer dared to approach his body. The old man raised his head and gave Wuqi a surprised look, then nodded and said with a smile, "Young man, you still have some good stuff with you." "Not bad." Wuqi didn't say anything. He sat down with his legs crossed, both of his palms locked into an ice lotus seal, which was unique to the dark Yin water scripture, and shielded his dantian. Eerie cold air kept rushing out from his body, stabilizing his mind while freezing the surrounding cold air with cracking noises. Large pieces of ice crystals fell from the top of his head, and not long after that, the grassland around them had turned white, as if winter had suddenly arrived. Gradually, a strange incantation was heard, as the old man pointed his finger at the ground in front of him. Amidst the screeching of ghosts, 7 pitch-black little ghosts, each about 1 foot tall and with their long tails raised, darted out from the ground. They were screaming and shrieking, randomly throwing a few pale white bones that were dragging in their hands onto the ground. These bones were oddly shaped, and they were densely covered with sharp thorns. Obviously, they did not belong to human beings. The elderly man reached out his hand and piled those bones into a pile. A few white whirlwinds swooshed over and hovered around the pile of bones, after which, a gray-white flame suddenly rose and set those bones ablaze. The gray-white flame gathered into a foot-wide sphere of fire, from which, a stream of white smoke rose straight into the air, reaching over 100 jang high. Being blown by the wind, the smoke dissipated into large clouds of white smoke, dissipating in the air. The bone plates of the beast of fortune and disaster were thrown into the grayish-white flame. The old man recited a few incantations in a low voice, then abruptly raised his head and said to Wuqi, "A drop of blood, now." Wuqi remained silent, staring at the old man without saying a word. The old man was taken aback, then he suddenly came to his senses and laughed out loud. He shook his head, sighed and said, "If I want to harm you, no matter how high your cultivation base is, you can never escape." With a flip of his hand, he pointed at the ground next to him. Immediately, the withered grass sprouted and grew back. The old man chuckled and flicked his finger. Suddenly, the ordinary grass turned into cabbages that covered the ground. They were fresh and tender, and grew very strong. 1 bag of cabbages weighed at least tens of kilograms. All the muscles in Wuqi's body began to twitch, and his scalp went numb. Heaven immortals could only use the most superficial laws of heaven and earth, using their power to destroy. Therefore, the battles between heaven immortals were often filled with flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder, and the sky was filled with dazzling lights. The effect of light and shadow was very pleasing to the eye. Gold immortals could twist the laws in a small area. What they studied was not the laws themselves, but the derivation and transformation of the laws. They could turn stone into gold, turn water into oil, and even blossom. These were the unique abilities of gold immortals. But to turn grass into cabbages, to completely transform one living thing into another, was something only the legendary primordial immortals, who could destroy, and change the laws, could do. It seemed easy to turn grass into cabbages, but in fact, it was 10,000 times more difficult than turning stone into gold. Without saying a word, Wuqi smashed his palm on his broken arm. His skin and flesh split open, and a great amount of blood sprayed out, sprinkling on the bone plate that was scorching hot by the grayish-white flame. As soon as the blood sprayed out, the bone plate made a loud crashing noise. Countless silver spots flickered rapidly on its surface, and a dozen intertwining cracks suddenly appeared on it. "Tisk, do you think human blood is like a river that doesn't need money?" The old man gave Wuqi a fierce glare and muttered in a low voice, "I've told you I only need 1 drop. Do you think it's nice to see it turn into a bloody mess?" Upon seeing the bone plate crack, the 7 black imps, who had just brought the white bones here as firewood, leaped and pounced on the old man, opening their mouths to gnaw on the old man's finger. The old man grabbed the scythe and swiftly hacked at the imps, causing black smoke to spray out from their bodies and nearly cutting them in half. The 7 imps were so frightened that they let out a strange cry, then turned into a plume of smoke and dissipated in the air. The old man cursed in a low voice, what a bunch of greedy little things. You're only helping me with a small task, yet you still want to get some benefits. I'm just one step away from death, and if you keep sucking my blood, won't I die a few days earlier? Shaking his head, the old man picked up the bone plate and carefully studied the cracks on it. After studying it for a full 15 minutes, the old man's expression flickered slightly. He stared at Wu Qi, sighed and said, "This is an ominous sign. You're really unlucky. If you keep going forward, you'll be killed. But, I'll be honest with you, there is a great opportunity hidden in this ominous sign. If you can go through it, you'll transform from a grass snake into a heavenly dragon, an opportunity that will bring you a meteoric rise. I don't believe you can go through it." Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and remained silent for a long while. He glanced at the hundreds of bags of cabbages around him, then slowly stood up. Bowing deeply to the old man, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Since there's a chance, I'll keep going. Thank you, my dear senior." Humming a folk song, Wu Qi turned around, transformed into a gust of wind, and flew towards the north. The old man paused for a second, then shook his head and cursed in a low voice, "You're courting death. You've wasted a bone plate of a beast of fortune and disaster." A faint laugh suddenly came from one of the cabbages, "But, he's a kind-hearted kid, isn't he?" The old man remained silent and pondered. After a long while, he transformed into a gust of wind and disappeared in the air. People always change. Especially those, Chapter 484. When an ant stood in front of a dragon, even if the dragon showed 100% kindness, the ant would flee at the fastest speed. There was no other reason other than the huge difference between them. Realm, overall strength, the superiority of species, and so on. Immortal cultivators were still human beings, heaven immortals only had a trace of humanity, and gold immortals were not human beings at all. As for primordial immortals, only heaven knew what they were. In short, Wu Qi was like a pitiful ant who had just escaped from the claws and fangs of a dragon, fleeing toward the northern ocean at the fastest speed. He did not even dare to turn his head back, fearing that he would be dragged into some vortex that could crush him to pieces. Without sufficient overall strength, one should not get involved in things that one could not afford to get involved in. This was the only way to save one's life in the world of immortal cultivators. This time, Wu Qi no longer walked slowly. Instead, he used all the means available to him to rush toward the dark abyss of the northern ocean at the fastest speed possible. Along the way, Wu Qi only stopped twice to sit cross-legged and communicate with his celestial fiend puppets with his mind. The first time was when Supremacy 3 Flame made up his mind to stay in Anhi City. He told Wu Qi's clone that he, Supremacy 3 Flame, was not the kind of man who would leave after getting some benefits. Therefore, Supremacy 3 Flame stayed in Anhi City as Wu Qi's friend, which could be considered as adding a very strong combative force to Wu Qi. Wu Qi thought it was a serious decision. At least, it was not a big deal for Supremacy 3 Flame to wander around with a little girl like Xue Mei. At her age, she needed a stable living environment. Therefore, Wu Qi welcomed Supremacy 3 Flame's decision with open arms. The second time was because Zhong Province's punishment court had once again sent a punishment officer to Anhi City to investigate the truth behind Miaoihu's death. This time, Wu Qi's clone changed his appearance and told the punishment court that Daoist Greed was just an itinerant cultivator who joined Euphoria Heavenly Palace temporarily. After Miaoihu appeared, Daoist Greed suddenly disappeared. As for the rest, Wu Qi did not know. The punishment court had no choice but to withdraw from Anhi City. But according to Bai's investigation, there are many unknown people lurking in Anhi City. Wu Qi did not make any response to this. If the government of Zhong Province wanted to lay their hands on Anhi City, that would be the best outcome. By the time Reverend Li Yang arrived at Anhi City with all the gold immortals of Green City, Wu Qi would have plenty of ways to make them swallow each other. After settling all these things, Wu Qi temporarily cut off the connection between himself and the celestial fiend puppets, focusing all his attention on the journey. They had been rushing for over 2 months, running for such a long time without any rest. Suddenly, a large cloud of water vapor rose up in front of them, and the faint sound of waves was deafening to their ears. They had arrived at the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. Wu Qi let out a joyful roar and darted forward dozens of miles in a stream of light, stopping on a rock on the shore. The dark abyss of the Northern Ocean was once a perilous land in the northernmost part of Pangu continent. But, as Pangu continent continued to expand, the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean was now just an inconspicuous speck on the continent, and it had lost its awe-inspiring reputation from the ancient times. Tens of thousands of lakes of various sizes appeared in front of Wu Qi like stars falling from the sky. The smallest of these lakes measured several thousand miles in circumference, while the bigger ones were tens of thousands of miles wide. Between these lakes, there were usually only mountains and hills separated by tens of miles, and they were connected by waterways that looked like spider webs. Regardless of the size of these lakes, they all had one obvious characteristic: they were extremely deep. When looking down from a high vantage point, one would find that all the lakes were dark blue or purple-black in color. The water here was extremely deep, with many of them reaching tens of thousands of miles deep. Countless deep-water creatures were hiding under the water, including many flood dragons. As for giant turtles, giant fishes, shrimps, and many other creatures, no one knew how many of them were hiding in the water. At the core of these lakes, which were connected like pearls, was a vast ocean with a diameter of more than 10 million miles. The water from all the lakes, rivers in the vicinity all poured into this vast ocean. And this vast ocean was the legendary dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. Since the ancient times, very few people had been able to find out exactly how deep this dark abyss was. 100,000 miles, 1,000,000 miles, or even 10 million miles. For existences below the realm of gold immortal, they would have to risk their lives to find out the depth of the dark abyss. Especially now that someone had occupied the Northern Ocean and built a cave abode, there were even fewer people who were interested in doing so. A strong wind came blowing from the opposite direction, rolling up the vast water vapor on the surface of the water and turning it into countless hurricanes that shot whistling into the sky. Among the hurricanes, huge birds could be vaguely seen flapping their wings, rising and falling with the wind. Huge fishes were seen swimming and bobbing on the surface of the water. Some of the huge birds swooped down to catch the fishes, while some of the fishes soared into the sky with the help of the wind and swung their tails at the birds. Their enormous bodies raised huge waves that towered up into the sky, and when the waves crashed onto the surface of the water, they produced deafening rumbles. Wu Qi glanced around and saw a small island surrounded by a few large lakes off in the distance. Houses could be seen faintly visible on the island. At first glance, he saw several thousand houses, with fishing nets hanging in front and behind the houses. There were also fishing boats anchored at the pier on the shore. On the shore several tens of miles to the right of Wu Qi, a few fishing boats were anchored. A few burly men were squatting at the prow, laughing and pointing at the huge fishes and birds that were wantonly swimming on the surface of the water. A thought flashed across Wu Qi's mind. He took off his dirty and ragged burlap clothes and put on a neat and clean gray Taoist robe, then strode towards the few men. When they were still several hundred feet away from the fishing boats, these men had stopped talking and laughing, and were looking at Wu Qi cautiously. From afar, one of the men cried out, "Taoist, what are you doing here?" Wu Qi cupped his fist and bowed, then shouted at the man with a deep voice, "I've come all the way from Zhong province, and I'm just here to enjoy the scenery of the Northern Ocean." The few men exchanged a glance, then burst out laughing at the same time. Shaking their heads, they said, "Enjoy the scenery? Hee hee, this is the most dangerous place in the Northern Ocean, what scenery can there be? This Taoist is not honest, just ignore him." Then, a chant rang out. Together, the few men swung the oars and drove the boat quickly towards the surface of the water. Wu Qi stared blankly at these few men, then shook his head helplessly. When the boat was still several million miles away from the Northern Ocean, Wu Qi had already discovered that there were no signs of human beings in the surroundings. However, When he arrived at the Northern Ocean, he discovered that there was actually a town here, with a population of several tens of thousands of people. How could he not come here to inquire about the situation? However, he did not expect that these fishermen would be so difficult to deal with. He did not even give them an answer, yet they turned around and left. Was he going to chase after them and force them to inquire about the situation in the Northern Ocean? Now that the Northern Ocean was a place with an owner, there must be a reason why these people were gathering at the border of the Northern Ocean. Beating the grass and startling the snake is not worth it. Rubbing his chin helplessly, Wu Qi looked at those fishermen and shook his head helplessly. He glanced to the left and right for a while. Several hundred miles away, separated by a mountain ridge shaped like a screen, he found a lonely fishing boat at the edge of another body of water that was connected to the lake through a 100 miles long waterway. Hastily, he exercised an escape art and darted towards the fishing boat. Noiselessly, he came to the shore, which was only a step away from the fishing boat. Smilingly, he stepped onto the stern of the boat. As soon as Wu Qi stepped onto the boat, the fishing boat began to move. The fisherman, who was squatting on the prow with his head lowered, turned his head and asked, "What is the job of a Taoist?" The fisherman, who was wearing a bamboo hat and a straw raincoat, looked to be at least 80 or 90 years old. He was missing his left arm, which was broken at the shoulder. He looked very similar to Wu Qi. His right foot was missing half of the sole of his foot, and only half of his foot was connected to his ankle. There was a horrible wound on the old man's face. It was as if a huge claw shaped like a flood dragon had swung fiercely from the left corner of his forehead all the way to the right side of his chin. For wounds had nearly split his head open. Now, only a thin layer of skin covered his bones, and the 4 deep wounds formed a strong contrast with his twisted face. Baring his teeth, Wu Qi expressed his strong admiration for this old fisherman for being able to survive until now. Cupping his fist and bowing, Wu Qi turned to the old fisherman and said with a smile, "Old sir, you asked me to do what I am here for. Is there anything interesting in Northern Ocean?" The old fisherman smiled faintly, shook his head and said, "Murder and arson. TSK, this Northern Ocean is a desolate place. Apart from our Ling Ao Island, there are no signs of human habitation within tens of millions of miles. It's impossible for us to visit our relatives and friends here, and sightseeing is even more difficult. But, I do find it interesting to come here for murder and arson." Wu Qi laughed dryly. He walked to the prow, squatted down beside the old fisherman, shook his head and said, "I do murder and arson occasionally, but it's not my main business. Come to Northern Ocean. TSK, old sir, have you been living on Ling Ao Island for generations?" Lowering his head, Wu Qi saw a dozen strange creatures hovering near the prow. They were about 10 feet long, shaped like eels, but covered with dragon scales, and emanating a faint red gleam from their bodies. These creatures were floating lazily on the surface of the water, their mouths wide open, breathing bubbles as they slept. The old fisherman pointed at these strange creatures and said coolly, "These are the blood dragon eels, the offspring of a 10,000-year-old moon-gazing blood-patterned eel and a flood dragon. They are the best at searching for rare and precious underwater treasures. They are the unique treasures of our Ling Ao Island. Ling Ao Island lives on the various rare and precious treasures fished out from the dark abyss of Northern Ocean." Ling Ao Island is a place designated by the treasure-gathering palace of Yu Dynasty to collect rare aquatic treasures. Don't you know that, Taoist? Looking thoughtfully at Ling Ao Island, where smoke could be seen rising from kitchen chimneys, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "I really don't know that." Apparently, Ling Ao Island was sent by the imperial clan of Yu Dynasty to collect the aquatic products of the Northern Ocean. No wonder they could settle down here. No wonder they could live here peacefully. Perhaps, there was an official garrison of Yu Dynasty stationed on Ling Ao Island, guarding it with a great army. While Wu Qi was lost in thought, a speedboat suddenly approached from the back of a small island tens of miles away. A burly man, clad in only a pair of underpants, was rowing the boat with all his strength. When he was a few miles away, the burly man shouted at the top of his lungs, "Grandpa Chan, go back now. Nyo Han has come to your house again. The old fisherman was taken aback. He hastily gave a whistle, and those blood dragon eels who were drifting lazily on the surface of the water sprung up and squeezed under the fishing boat. Then, they lifted the boat up and sped towards Ling Ao Island like a gust of strong wind, sticking close to the surface of the water. Wu Qi was struck dumb, but he did not say a word. He squatted on the prow and let the fishing boat bring him to Ling Ao Island. Chapter 485. As the fishing boat and the man's boat passed each other, the burly man gave a loud cry as he grabbed a rope from the prow and threw it towards the fisherman. The rope tied accurately onto a wooden stake at the stern of the old fisherman's boat. All of a sudden, the mooring rope became taut, and the fishing boat that was pulling the burly man changed its direction, pulling him tightly as it sped towards Ling Ao Island. The burly man leaped high into the air and landed lightly on the old fisherman's prow. He bowed to the old fisherman, then turned to look at Wu Qi from head to toe and said, "Taoist, are you here to buy some aquatic products from Northern Ocean? Do you want some pearls, or some aquatic spirit herbs? I have 2 anaconda tendons with me. Do you want them?" No energy was leaking from the burly man's body, but Wu Qi had learned how to judge the cultivation base of a human warrior. A strange gleam flickered in his eyes. Through the muscles and bones of the burly man, and through the density of his muscles and bones, Wu Qi roughly judged that the strength possessed by this burly man was definitely not weaker than an ordinary nascent soul body cultivator. Pearls, aquatic spirit herbs, anaconda tendons. All of these items were useful to immortal cultivators. Wu Qi smiled and asked, "Just now, this old man mentioned that Ling Ao Island is the place where the treasure gathering palace purchases their precious treasures. So, the treasures you bring here can be sold at will?" The burly man rolled his eyes and said with a strange voice, Yeah. What is a Taoist like you doing in Northern Ocean when you know nothing? You look like a thief, and I can tell at first glance that you are not a good person." The burly man snorted coldly as he took a step back vigilantly. His right hand pressed against a sharp dagger clipped to the top of his pants as he sneered and said, "Every year, Treasure Gathering Palace sets a quota for Ling Ao Island. As long as we fulfill the quota, we can sell the rest of the treasures to our guests. You don't even know this? What are you doing in Northern Ocean?" Wu Qi spread his arms and said sincerely, "I have no evil intentions. I just came to Northern Ocean to broaden my horizons." The burly man shook his head and said with a cold grin, "What a load of bullshit. You came to Northern Ocean to broaden your horizons? Ha, even among you immortal cultivators, there aren't many people who know where the Northern Sea is. You've worked so hard to come here, and you may have encountered all kinds of dangers along the way, just to see it?" Wu Qi was too lazy to speak. He just smiled and squatted at the bow, looking at the scenery in the distance. Although Ling Ao Island was several hundred miles away, the blood dragon eels that were pulling the boat could swim very fast. It would take them about 15 minutes to reach the island. Moreover, when the blood dragon eel swam, it could release a gentle astral energy to protect the fishing boat. Squatting at the bow of the boat, they could not feel the slightest bit of wind. Wu Qi leisurely enjoyed the scenery while the big man looked at him vigilantly. After a long time, he said seriously, "Taoist, don't make trouble on the island." Although Ling Ao Island was a small island with only 3,000 households, there were 10,000 soldiers stationed here. The ones in charge of guarding this place are 4 great generals with Swan Ni general seals. Don't seek your own death. Wu Qi nodded his head and did not say anything. The great general with the seal of the Swan Ni. He was indeed worthy of Wu Qi's attention. Through the information he received from the celestial fiend puppets a few days ago, Wu Qi had learned a part of the military system of Diyu. The captains with the highest position in the army would receive the seal of the divine beasts of the 4 divine beasts. The azure dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise were the strongest and most influential generals in Diyu's army. Basically, all the official positions such as the military commander of Zhong province were held by the generals with the seal of the four divine beasts. Below them were the great generals with the seals of Qilin, Phoenix, and other divine beasts. Their positions were just below the great generals. Below the seals of Qilin and Phoenix were all sorts of divine beasts and immortal beasts. There were nearly 100 of them, and they were divided into 9 grades and 36 ranks from top to bottom, which matched the 9 grades of Dayu's provinces. Among these divine beasts and immortal beasts, Lao Ai was ranked in the middle. He was considered a very powerful general, possessing the overall strength of upper-tier or even top-tier heaven immortals. As a small Ling Ao island, which only had 3,000 households, was guarded by 4 upper-tier heaven immortals, its defense could be considered as very strong. Amidst the long-winded man's nagging, the fishing boat quivered slightly and anchored itself at a pier on Ling Ao island. Hastily, the old man grabbed a fish basket from the cabin, staggered and leaped onto the pier, then sprinted along the main road. Hastily, the burly man grabbed the rope and tied the fishing boat to a row of iron pillars on the pier, then ran after the old man. Wu Qi had been following behind the old fisherman for a long time, following closely behind him. While running wildly, the old man turned his head and said to Wu Qi, "Don't follow me, Taoist. That Niu Han is not a good man. If you follow this old man and watch the show, be careful not to get yourself into trouble. He won't do anything to me, but I'm sure he will find some loopholes to punish the people around him." Wu Qi shook his head and said with a smile, "It doesn't matter. I don't mean anything else." The old man twitched his mouth, twisting the 4 deep wounds on his face. He shook his head and breathed out a long sigh, then continued running along the main road. Surprisingly, his speed was not much slower than an ordinary sword beam. Wu Qi gave the old man a quick glance with the mystic eyes of universe. He found that the old man's overall strength was 1 level higher than the burly man's. Perhaps, with his extraordinary strength, he could fight against a nascent divinity body cultivator. In just a few breaths of time, the old man had run into a small village. While he was still at the entrance of the village, he heard a loud noise coming from inside, and even the noise of clay jars being smashed to pieces. The old man let out a cry while panting, then quickened his pace. Amidst the swishing noises of wind, Wu Qi followed the old man and came before a courtyard in the village. It was a spacious and tidy courtyard. The architectural style of the entire village was the same as the traditional buildings in other parts of Dayu. It was a heavy and sturdy square-shaped building built with dark green boulders, with a huge stone pillar standing in front of the door, burning with a raging flame. There were 2 entrances to the front and back of the house, and 2 rows of side rooms on both sides. The courtyard in front of the house was paved with green flagstones, measuring approximately 1 acre in area. It was obvious that this eunuch Chan came from a wealthy family. Otherwise, he would not have been able to build such a courtyard. Not only his house, but all the other courtyards in the village were of the same scale. It seemed that the people living on Ling Ao Island had a pretty good standard of living. Now, the courtyard was crowded with villagers, and the courtyard was crowded with people as well. Perhaps, there were nearly 1,000 people in the courtyard. All of a sudden, a few villagers outside the courtyard turned their heads and saw the old man running back, panting heavily. "Eunuch Chan is back! Eunuch Chan is back! Everyone, make way for him! Quick, quick!" The crowd parted to the left and right, revealing a path about 3 feet wide. The old fisherman walked over with a gloomy face. Wu Qi followed behind him and passed through the crowd, then blended into the crowd of villagers. By tiptoeing, he could see what was happening in the courtyard. A dark-skinned, fat man, clad in a long green robe, a tall crown made of green jade on his head, 2 jade ornaments tied around his waist, and a medallion hanging on his waist. He was dressed like a Dayu official, standing in the courtyard with his head held high, glancing left and right. 2 broken clay jars were seen lying on the ground, with about 300 to 500 thumb-sized silvery white pearls rolling and rolling about. Presumably, they were thrown out from the clay jars. A young girl clad in a coarse hemp garment, with her hair tied into 2 buns, was being guarded by a few young men. The few young men were nearly 10 feet tall, and each of them looked valiant and hot-blooded. They stood in front of the girl, their faces flushed with anger. 2 of them had even pulled out their sharp blades, panting heavily as they confronted the few soldiers brought by the dark-skinned, fat man. The few soldiers had a greasy smile on their faces, laughing and commenting on the sharpness of the sharp blades held by the few young men. Judging from their smiles and the way they talked and laughed, one could easily tell that they were a group of typical army ruffians, and not some decent people. The old fisherman carried his fishing basket and rushed into the crowd. He first greeted the young girl and said, "Lu Chana, are you all right?" Hiding behind the few young men, the girl kept shaking her head and said, "Grandpa, Chana is fine. Just be careful." Wu Qi threw a glance at the girl through the gap in the crowd, and his heart trembled slightly. The girl had a beautiful appearance, like an orchid transformed from a wild elf. She was small and delicate, tender and soft, and emanated a pure and innocent aura. Looking at her was like looking at a forest in spring, which had never been inhabited since the beginning of time, filled with endless vitality. The girl's skin was snow-white and tender, and her eyes were as clear and pure as the spring, without any impurities. She had a tall and straight nose, and a cute, rosy mouth that was shaped like a water chestnut. The first impression she gave off was that she was pure, the second impression was that she was fresh, and the third impression was that she was so beautiful that it could enchant one's heart. Femme fatale, Wu Qi judged the scene before his eyes. That dark-skinned, fat man should be Niu Han, and this girl was obviously his target. Wu Qi took a look at Niu Han's waistline, his dark, hairy face, and the barbaric look in his eyes and brows. If this Lu Chana were to follow him, not to mention that a beautiful flower was stuck on a cow dung, the cow dung could be used to fertilize the fields, but this Niu Han was even worse than cow dung. With his hands clasped behind his back, Wu Qi shook his head. The old fisherman, Eunuch Chan, coughed dryly, then walked up to Niu Han and said in a low voice, "Your Excellency Niu Han, what brings you here today?" Niu Han raised his head proudly and said in a cold voice, "Old Chan, it has been 3 years since you paid the quota. Do you not take the imperial decree of Great Yu seriously at all? TSK, during these 3 years, when have you ever paid the required quota?" Not even once. 6 times in 3 years, you're the only one on the entire island who failed to pay the required quota. You're making things very difficult for me. Niu Han raised his foot and crushed the dozens of pearls around him. Grinning hideously, he said, "Lu Chana is still trying to fool me with these lousy pearls. Hee, these are trash that no one would want even if they were thrown on the street. How can they be offered to His Majesty as a tribute?" Wu Qi glanced at the pearls. The thumb-sized silver pearls contained a trace of acquired water essence, which had already condensed into a Yin water pearl. They were all supreme-grade pearls, and if worn by ordinary people all year round, they could nourish the body and prolong the lifespan. If sold to immortal cultivators, these pearls would be excellent materials for crafting all kinds of magical treasures, or even spirit items. In the immortal market, each of these pearls could be exchanged for 1 middle-grade energy stone. So, how could these pearls be considered trash? Eunuch Chan remained silent for a moment, then fished out a clump of tightly wrapped seaweed from his fish basket, from which he fished out a fist-sized blue pearl. As soon as the pearl appeared, it emitted a 3 feet thick blue light, illuminating the entire courtyard. The surrounding villagers burst into cheers, then laughed and said, "A supreme-grade blue ocean pearl. 1 pearl is worth more than 3 years' worth of tributes." Wu Qi nodded with a smile. He didn't expect that Eunuch Chan would actually prepare such a good pearl. Almost all of these pearls had developed sentience. With just a little carving and a few restrictive spells, it could transform into a supreme-grade spirit item. For immortal cultivators, this was the most ideal material for crafting items. With its value, any immortal market could easily sell it for several hundred upper-grade energy stones. Niu Han's expression flickered slightly. He looked around at the cheering villagers, then suddenly snatched the pearl from Eunuch Chan's hands. Clenching his fist, he crushed the pearl into powder. You dare to take out such trash to fool others? The pearl powder sprinkled through the gaps between Johan's fingers. Instantly, the surroundings fell into a dead silence. Eunuch Chan's face twitched as he narrowed his eyes. Chapter 486. The blue pearl powder was blown away by the wind. Johan clasped his hands behind his back and laughed complacently. The old fisherman's only arm was shivering as he staggered a step forward. He fixed his eyes on Johan and said in a low voice, "Your Excellency Johan, you." Chi-Chi took a step forward, shrinking the small space left in the courtyard by more than half. The villagers, whose eyes were bursting with flames of fury, nearly stuck their bodies to Johan's body. Johan sneered, tilted his head up arrogantly, and cried out, "Do you all want to be like old Chan, failing to pay even one tribute for 3 years in a row?" He glared fiercely at the surrounding villagers, then snapped, "Who wants to be like old Chan? Step out now." A dead silence reigned in the surroundings. The villagers looked at each other helplessly. There was anger in their eyes, but there was also a deep sorrow and helplessness. The entire village was filled with a deathly silence. Only Johan's evil laughter kept ringing out, "Think it through. I'm not someone you can afford to provoke. Why are you crowding around here? Get the hell out of here. If you want to stand up for the injustice, get the hell out of Ling Ao Island. Only then will you have the qualifications to stand up for the injustice." Gradually, the encirclement of the villagers became thinner. The first villager began to retreat, followed by the second, and the third. Gradually, except for a few young men who stood in front of Lu Chaner, whose faces were flushed with anger, all the other villagers had retreated several tens of feet. Many villagers were pushed out of the courtyard, lying on the wall, helplessly looking at the insufferably arrogant Johan. As the villagers retreated, Wu Qi, who had been hiding behind them, was revealed. Johan gave Wu Qi a suspicious look, but he shook his head disapprovingly. He pointed his finger at the old fisherman and snapped, "Old Chan, if you don't pay enough tribute this time, don't blame me for doing things according to the law. Your entire family, I mean you and Lu Chaner, will be expelled from Ling Ao Island." After a slight pause, Johan proudly shook his head and said with a chuckle, "According to the commandments issued by the treasure-gathering hall, you, Old Chan, haven't submitted a single qualified pearl for 3 years in a row. This is disrespect to His Majesty, and all your possessions will be confiscated. As for you, Old Chan, TSK, can your old bones still withstand the punishment of 300 strokes of the rod?" Buzzing sounds of complaints came from all directions, and all the villagers started yelling at the same time. Johan glared fiercely at the villagers around him and snapped, "What are you doing? You want to rebel? Ha, do you think that the sharp blades of my brother-in-law's army can't chop off your heads? Ha! Do you want to rebel? Let me tell you, there are too many people who want to come to Ling Ao Island and live a good life. What's so difficult about killing you filthy bastards and recruiting a new batch of treasure gatherers?" The buzzing noise stopped abruptly. Johan hummed a few tunes complacently, then his tones suddenly became very gentle. "Old cicada, you're already so old, and it's too risky for you to go to the ocean to collect treasures. Why don't you marry Lu Chaner to me? Hee, I'll take care of you until you die. What do you think?" The few young men who stood in front of Lu Chaner took a step forward angrily and shouted, "Johan, you are too shameless." Johan snorted coldly. Suddenly, he fished out a palm-sized bone talisman from under his sleeve and crushed it. A sheet of white light rushed out from the talisman and coiled around Johan's hand. Suddenly, his right arm became 20 feet long and as thick as a water bucket. He snorted and thrust his palm down. The few young men cried out in alarm as they were knocked flying several hundred feet away. Wu Qi heard the crisp sound of bones breaking. At least half of the bones of the few young men were broken. After knocking away the few young men, Johan grabbed the old fisherman with one hand. He frowned and said, Old Chan, I know you came to Ling Ao Island from the outside world. You are a man who has seen the world, and you are much harder to deal with than the people of Ling Ao Island. You also know that my brother-in-law is only one of the 4 great generals of Ling Ao Island, and the other 3 have their eyes on him. That's why I dare not snatch Lu Chan away. But, don't force me. Nyo Han squeezed the old fisherman and cried out, don't force me. If you don't want to marry me officially, I'll drive you out of Ling Ao Island, then chase after you with my army and kill you, you old fool. But, Lu Chana will still have to accompany me every night. Nyo Han's thick fingers squeezed the old fisherman's joints and made them creak. Lao Tzu has endured for 3 years. Among all the women on Ling Ao Island, Lao Tzu can do whatever he wants, but you, Lu Chaner, are the only one who you treat like some rare treasure. Don't force me. Even if my brother-in-law is impeached by his colleagues because of this, I won't care about anything else. I'll definitely fuck her. The old fisherman's eyes rolled back. Although his fleshly body was strong enough to fight against a nascent divinity body cultivator, he was old and weak, and his physical strength was less than 30% of what it was when he was in his prime. That was why he could not unleash his full strength. Using the standard bone talisman provided by Diyu army, Nyo Han activated a spell that belonged to the god of devils and gods. In just a blink of an eye, his overall strength had increased by 100 times, and the muscles in his right arm were strengthened by at least 100 times. With the old fisherman's current overall strength, how could he possibly struggle free? He tried his best to shake his head and struggle, but still, his joints creaked noisily. It looked like he was about to be strangled to death by Nyo Han. Lu Chaner screamed in terror as she leaped towards the old fisherman, trying to reach him. But, the few soldiers with greasy faces blocked her way while laughing merrily. They reached out their hands and stopped her, flirting with her with glib tongues, not allowing her to get close to the old fisherman. One of the soldiers laughed and said, Lu Chaner, from now on, we'll call you sister-in-law. TSK, we are a family, so what are you afraid of? Wu Qi could not stand it any longer. He shook his head and grabbed Nyo Han's big hand. Although all his fake nascent souls were destroyed by the primordial gold talisman, and he had not cultivated back even one fake nascent soul, Wu Qi's physical strength was not something that Nyo Han, who had used the bone talisman, could contend against. Wu Qi placed his fingers on Nyo Han's elbow joint and exerted his strength. Cracking noises could be heard coming from Nyo Han's bones, which made him cry out in pain. Without hesitation, he loosened his fingers. A large plume of white mist sprayed out from Nyo Han's arm, and suddenly, his thick arm returned to its original shape. Flustered and exasperated, Nyo Han pointed his finger at Wu Qi and roared, Daoist, what do you do for a living? Wu Qi smiled, squatted down and picked up a few silvery white pearls, and said coolly, Grandpa Chan, 1 mid-grade energy stone for 1 pearl. What do you think? Some unforeseen events happened to me a few days ago, and I don't have any energy stones with me. Can I exchange them with gold ingots? On Panggu continent, a lower-grade energy stone was worth about 10 gold ingots, and a mid-grade energy stone was worth 100 lower-grade energy stones. Therefore, for each pearl, Wu Qi would have to pay 1,000 gold ingots. He had brought countless gold, silver, and other jewelry from Great Yan's secret vault, so he could afford these pearls. The old fisherman was taken aback. He took a few steps back, and Lu Chaner quickly came over and held him up. Wu Qi touched the black dragon spirit ring, and immediately, a pile of gold ingots shot out from his chest like a stream of water, piling up into a small golden pyramid in the courtyard before Chi-Chi. He looked at the old fisherman, smiled, and said, if these pearls were sold in the immortal market, they would be sold for about 1 mid-grade energy stone each. I'm quite poor lately, as all my energy stones and magical treasures have been destroyed. I can use these pearls to craft some defensive items. The old fisherman's lips trembled slightly. While he was about to say yes, Nyo Han had already leaped to his feet hysterically. Pointing his finger at Wu Qi, he roared, how presumptuous. I've ordered the 3 major merchants of Ling Ao Island to forbid anyone from buying anything from this old fogey. Where did you come from, cultivator? Ah. Do you know that apart from the 3 major merchants of Ling Ao Island, all itinerant cultivators are not allowed to trade with the islanders privately? Wu Qi stared coldly at Niu Han, shook his head, and said, I'm just a passerby. Niu Han, a fair and graceful lady, is a good match for a gentleman. He doesn't like you, so why do you have to force him? You have a good brother-in-law, and you have a little power in your hand. Yet, you abused your power for personal gain, taking bribes and bending the law, forcing innocent people and weak girls. Don't you feel ashamed? Don't push things too far. The old fisherman's eyes flickered as he held Lu Channer's palm tightly with his only arm. Lu Channer narrowed her eyes as she stared at Wu Qi. A sharp gleam could be seen flickering in her eyes. The old fisherman turned his head and gave her a look. She nodded slowly, her lips moving slightly as she softly said, You have a good character. Wu Qi scolded Niu Han with a stern and righteous voice, while Niu Han's face turned blue with anger. Cut the crap. He cried out sternly. Somebody, kill this unruly Taoist and throw his body into the bottomless abyss to feed the fishes. Kill this old fool as well. Lu Channer, do you think Lao Tzu is going to kill you today? While Niu Han was jumping and cursing happily, the old fisherman sighed softly, shook his head, and said, Sure enough, each generation is worse than the previous one. Alas, Niu Han, you've brought a disaster to your family. The old man came before Niu Han and gave him a series of dozens of slaps, turning his cheeks into mush. Niu Han shrieked in pain, but before he could scream twice, the old man had already flicked his finger and forcefully pointed it at Niu Han's forehead. Niu Han shuddered. Suddenly, his eyes rolled back and he fell heavily to the ground. A plume of white smoke sprayed out from his body. With a loud puff, Niu Han suddenly transformed into a 1-foot-tall toad, hopping and screaming in panic. Once again, Wu Qi felt his scalp go numb. Trembling, he took a few steps back and stared at Grandpa Chan in astonishment. The ability to transform a human being into another living being was like turning a tiny grass into a cabbage. It was a power of the same realm and level. The old fisherman nodded at Wu Qi smilingly, sighed softly, and said, I've stayed on Ling Ao Island for a few years. Initially, I just wanted to relax myself, but who would have thought that I would run into something like this? Looking around, the old fisherman heaved a long sigh at the dumbfounded villagers and said, All of you have truly disappointed me. While sighing, the old fisherman gave Wu Qi a glance, then pulled Lu Channer and twisted their bodies, transforming into 2 grayish-white seagulls. Gracefully, they soared into the sky and pierced through the white clouds in the sky. Wu Qi's hand trembled. With a bitter smile on his face, he shook his head and said, Why would I want to be a good person for no reason? Did I run into a ghost during the past few days? Why do I keep seeing strange people like this? The toad that Niu Han had transformed into croaked again. It reminded Wu Qi of the identity of the man behind Niu Han. Without hesitation, he sprung into the air and sped towards the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. He did not plan to stay on Ling Ao Island to gather information. After flying for 3 days and 3 nights, Wu Qi finally arrived at the edge of the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. Right when he flew into the sky above the dark abyss, a wave suddenly rose from the surface of the water. A yiksha, who had a green face and sharp fangs, his body covered in bull-sized fish scales, and tens of short horns sticking out of his head, was seen standing on the wave. He pointed his finger at Wu Qi and cried out, This is the territory of the supreme patriarchs of the Northern Ocean. Taoist, considering that this is the first time you've committed a crime, you'd better leave now, or else, you'll be killed. Wu Qi was overjoyed. This was the place. Chapter 487. While the yiksha was still talking to Wu Qi in the water, the sound of war drums suddenly rang out from behind. Wu Qi turned around and saw 10 flying ships approaching at lightning speed. War banners were fluttering on the dragon-shaped ships. On the black banners with the character, "U" embroidered with silver patterns, a huge blood-red swani divine beast was roaring furiously into the sky. A burly man clad in a blood-red armor was standing solemnly on the prow of one of the ships, staring at Wu Qi with a gaze as sharp as a blade from several tens of miles away. Wu Qi exchanged a glance with the man, then turned to the Yiksha indifferently and said with a smile, "I've come to the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean to collect some aquatic treasures. Fellow Taoist, please do me a favor and let me stay here for 3 to 5 days." The Yiksha shook his head and cried out, "If you want aquatic treasures, go to Ling Ao Island and find the merchant there." The dark abyss of the Northern Ocean was occupied by Patriarch 10,000 years ago. Now, it is his temporary imperial residence. If any outsider dares to step into it. Thud. Yiksha hammered his own head heavily, laughed evilly, and said, "Idiot, how could I forget about this? Any outsider who steps into the dark abyss without permission will be put to death. This was the rule 2 years ago, but it has changed now." Holding the pitchfork in his hand, he thrust it into the water. A water rope as thick as a thumb soared out from the waves, thrusting straight towards Wu Qi. With a thought in his mind, Wu Qi simply let the water rope bind him. The water rope tied Wu Qi tightly, forming an ancient divine rune on Wu Qi's body that represented the meaning of binding and confinement. The 10 flying ships arrived at the edge of the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. The burly man standing on the prow cried out sternly, patrolling Yiksha, "Please give me that Taoist. I'll definitely reward you handsomely for your kindness today." The Yiksha gave the burly man a cold glance, then spun and left without saying a word, carrying the water rope that bound Wu Qi. The burly man said anxiously, "Fellow Taoist, please do me a favor. This Taoist killed my brother-in-law. How am I going to face the world if I don't avenge him?" Wu Qi gave a strange laugh, then turned to look at the burly man on the flying ship, winked at him, and made a face at him. The Yiksha, who was walking on the waves in the depths of the dark abyss with Wu Qi, turned around and cried out angrily, "Cut the crap. This Taoist is now a member of Miaoing Palace. If you want to bring him back, go and talk to the elders. Don't talk with me." He snorted a few times, then scolded in a low voice, "We are just laborers who patrol the ocean. Our superiors have given us orders, so we just need to follow their orders. Why are you talking to us? TSK, 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 Taoist, you refused to leave when I asked you to. Now, you are going to be a coolie just like us." On the flying ship, the burly man, Mo Feihu, Niu Han's brother-in-law, General de Yulao Ai, one of the 4 great generals guarding Ling Ao Island, stared at Wu Qi with a flustered and exasperated expression, his body trembling with rage. He raised his hand, about to give the order for 10 flying ships to charge into the territorial waters of the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean and bring Wu Qi back by force. But after a brief moment of hesitation, he could not make up his mind. He stamped his foot and cursed under his breath, "Forget it. Niu Han is dead meat this time. Who is that old fellow? What kind of evil spell did he use to turn him into that? TSK, forget it. I bet this Taoist has no idea who that old cicada is." With a wry smile, Mo Feihu brought the 10 flying ships back to Ling Ao Island. His order could still be vaguely heard in the wind. "Send a few smart scouts to keep an eye on this area. If they see that Taoist, send word back immediately. Prepare a generous gift. Select a batch of blue abyssal coral spirits, and send them to the Directorate of Celestials of Feng Province together with Niu Han. Ask the right minister to personally help and see if he can break the spell on him. What a bastard. That old fellow. The flying ships left into the distance. Carried by the Yiksha, Wu Qi flew all the way to the depths of the Northern Ocean. Wu Qi did not say a word, but the Yiksha kept silent for a while, then began to ramble on. The clan of Yikshas was the incarnation of the demons living in the ocean. They were loyal, brave, mighty, and extremely strong. Some of them were born with innate divine abilities. Therefore, the main force of the armies and servants of those almighty experts who ruled the ocean, or those dragon kings, were Yakshas. However, Yakshas were, after all, the incarnation of demons, and their brains were not enough to process the information. The Yaksha in front of Wu Qi was one of them. With just a few words, he had basically told Wu Qi all the things that he could come into contact with in Miaoying Palace. After the patriarch of Miaoying Palace occupied the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean, she built Miaoying Palace at the bottom of the abyss as a temporary palace, with the purpose of using the extreme yin energy found in the land of 9 yin negate yang in the deepest part of the dark abyss to craft some powerful weapon of the Fiend League. For nearly 10,000 years, Miaoying Palace had set up an iron rule: anyone who did not belong to Miaoying Palace would be killed on the spot. However, 2 years ago, the goddess Miao Xian, who was in charge of all the internal and external affairs of Miaoying Palace, was patrolling the Northern Ocean. She had captured a man from somewhere. Wu Qi had no idea what the man was capable of, as he managed to convince goddess Miao Xian with just a few words. As a result, he was now the supervisor of coolies in Miaoying Palace. Wu Qi thought he had heard it wrong. He moved closer to the Yaksha and asked loudly, "What? Supervisor of coolies?" The Yaksha gave Wu Qi a pitying look, then patted Wu Qi's shoulder and said, "Taoist, what do you think? TSK, this is the order given by Supervisor Lu. For the past 2 years, if there are still people who trespass Miaoying Palace, TSK, we are not allowed to kill them, but capture them alive and send them to be coolies." The Yaksha smacked his lips, laughed foolishly, and said, "I was sleepy just now, and almost forgot about this new rule. I was thinking that since you refused to return, I would kill you and feed you to the fishes. I suddenly remembered Steward Lu's rule, so you can't blame me. It's your bad luck. Go and be a laborer." Wu Qi's eyes darted back and forth as he moved his body slightly, loosening the water rope that bound him. He possessed the innate water energy essence. Although the restrictive technique used by this Yaksha was ingenious, the source of its energy was too weak. Therefore, there was no way it could restrain Wu Qi, and he could easily shatter the water rope and escape at any time. Besides, it would not be dangerous for him to be a coolie in Miaoying Palace. He could sneak into Miaoying Palace and gather some information. Miaoying Palace occupied the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. It was the temporary imperial residence of some patriarch, an existence that even the officials of Yu dynasty did not dare to offend. Wu Qi knew that it would be extremely difficult for him to obtain the thread of innate yang energy in the depths of the dark abyss. But no matter how difficult it was, he had to give it a try. Immortal cultivators were like rowing a boat against the current. If they did not struggle with all their might, how could they make any progress? Bringing Wu Qi along, the Yaksha trod on the waves and parted them, bringing with him the sound of splashing water. Wherever they passed, no matter it was the big birds flying in the sky or the big fishes swimming in the water, all of them dodged and fled hastily, not daring to stand before the Yaksha. The two of them traveled for several hundred miles without any mishap. Before them, a pitch-black reef stood towering on the surface of the water. A few equally hideous Yakshas were laughing merrily, fishing with fishing rods in their hands. However, the aura emanating from these Yakshas had a very strong deterrent to the fishes. No fish dared to take the bait when they were fishing on the reef. All the fishes within 10 miles had long fled. Pulling Wu Qi along, the Yaksha rushed to the reef excitedly, showing off with a proud face, "Brothers, we've caught a live prey. We're lucky today, as we've caught a live prey. Ha!" A few Yakshas threw away their fishing rods and came over to Wu Qi, pinching him a few times with their hands and feet. Wu Qi felt his hair stand on end. The claws of these Yakshas were bony and covered with a thick layer of scales, which made it hard for him to touch them. One of the Yakshas held up 3 fingers and said, "If you are not strong enough, you will die of exhaustion in 3 months. Another Yaksha punched Wu Qi's chest, grinned and said, "The muscles on his chest are not bad. I say he will die of exhaustion in 6 months. One after another, the few Yikshaws placed their bets on when Wuchi would die of exhaustion. The longest bet was that he would die of exhaustion in the black mine in 10 months. They took out their bets and handed them to the oldest Yikshaw to be the witness. These Yikshaws must be very poor, so the bets they took out were only a few shabby low-grade spirit stones, which could not even be considered as low-grade. Apart from these spirit stones, there were also a few worn-out pearls and a few broken fish scales. When the Yikshaws were done placing their bets, the Yikshaw pulled Wuchi up with a smile and walked into a teleportation formation on top of the reef. A beam of light flashed, and Wuchi and the Yikshaw disappeared from the reef at the same time. When the light reappeared in front of Wuchi's eyes, he had come to a mine that was surrounded by pitch-black holes, from which a series of clanking noises could be heard coming from all directions. Nearly 1,000 Yikshaws, clad in armors and holding sharp blades in their hands, stood at the entrances and exits of the mine, scanning left and right with stern gazes. Some cultivators, whose clothes were ragged or even barely covering their bodies, were panting in a low voice as they tried their best to drag carts made of pure iron out of those deep mines, pitch black and heavy ores one after another with great difficulty. Obviously, those ores were extremely heavy. The wheels of the mine carts made of pure metal rubbed against the ground, sending out sparks from time to time, and leaving deep tracks on the ground. The mine Wuchi was in was tens of miles in both width and length, with a height of 7 to 8 miles. The walls of the mine were filled with tunnels, and there were at least 200 entrances of different sizes. Suddenly, a loud noise was heard coming from one of the entrances. A cultivator, who was dragging a mine cart, fell silently to the ground, with no sign of life left in his body. A few Yikshaws came over to have a look, then turned to look at Wuchi at the same time. They waved their hands at Wuchi, then one of them laughed and said, 2 months and 10 days, I'm so tired. TSK, I've won. Newcomer, you take my place. The Yikshaw who brought Wuchi here gave a loud laugh. With one hand, he sliced Wuchi's body and cut the water rope, then grabbed Wuchi and threw him into the mine several miles away. Yikshaws were born with incredible strength. With just one throw, Wuchi was thrown a few miles away, landing right in front of the mine entrance. One of the Yikshaws grabbed the metal chain from the mine cart and wrapped it around Wuchi's shoulder. Another Yikshaw grabbed a leather whip and lashed it fiercely at Wuchi. Work harder, he snapped sternly. Otherwise, I'll kill you. The whip lashed heavily on Wuchi's body, ripping the linen cloth covering him. Chapter 488. Ding ding, dang dang, clattering. Beside Wuchi, a cultivator, who was weakly hammering the surface of the mine with a pickaxe in his hand, suddenly dug out a rock the size of a human head. The rock, as black as coal, fell to the ground. Its outer layer broke, revealing a black ore the size of 2 fists, glinting with a faint metallic luster. There was a faint golden luster on its surface. This was the nether ocean dark gold copper, which was extremely precious in the world of cultivators. The cultivator, whose face had turned blue from hunger, leaped forward excitedly, picked up the ore with great difficulty, and placed it into the mine cart behind him. Off in the distance, a dozen cultivators who were also working in the mine threw an envious glance over their shoulder. They turned to look at the Yikshaws squatting at the entrance of the mine, grilling fish and laughing merrily. Then, they lifted their pickaxes again and went back to their work. Wuchi gave the lucky cultivator a glance, then raised his pickaxe and continued hammering the surface of the mine before him. The nether ocean dark gold copper was extremely valuable in the world of cultivators. For example, the spirit medicines, herbs, and rare ores that Wuchi brought out from Myriad Immortals' planet were only spirit items below the 7th tier. In other words, the things Wuchi brought out from Myriad Immortals' planet were very valuable, but only to Heaven Immortals. The immortal pills made from spirit medicines were only useful to Heaven Immortals, and the rare ores could only be used to craft immortal items. As for the mountainous piles of upper-grade energy stones, they were very useful to cultivators below the realm of Heaven Immortals, but not so useful to Heaven Immortals, as they were just daily consumables. But, all these were useless to existences above the realm of heaven immortals. Gold immortals were existences one tier higher than heaven immortals, and what they needed were spirit items of the fourth, fifth, or sixth tier. The nether ocean dark gold copper was a spirit item that was slightly above the sixth tier, close to the fifth tier. It was a supreme grade material that could be used to craft gold immortal items. Yes, gold immortal items that were even more powerful than immortal items. The nether ocean dark gold copper was a precious ore formed by the red copper of geocentric flame, which erupted from the volcanoes in the Earth's core. After being crushed and scoured by the tremendous pressure of the deep ocean for at least 2 eons, it had absorbed an enormous amount of natural energy. The nether sea mysterious gold copper was born with the fusion of metal and water elements. It was a dual-element innate fey. An ordinary heaven immortal's immortal artifact was just a manifestation of a form's power, a manifestation of a law. A fire elemental celestial immortal instrument, a water elemental celestial immortal instrument, a metal elemental celestial immortal instrument. No matter what material was used to forge a celestial immortal instrument, it embodied the ultimate use of a certain type of power. It was the embodiment of a power that was close to the core of a certain law. As for gold immortal artifacts, the power of gold immortals lay in the fusion, mutation, distortion, and transformation of laws. Only materials that were born with 2 or more powers could be used to refine gold immortal artifacts. If a heaven immortal were to trade the spirit herbs, ores, and energy stones that Wu Qi brought out from myriad immortals' planet, he might be able to purchase countless treasures. But if he were to trade with a gold immortal, that gold immortal would not even look at his collection, and would instead choose a fist-sized nether ocean dark gold copper ore. The quality of the nether ocean dark gold copper ore in this mine was pretty good. 3 million kilograms of ore could be extracted into 3 kilograms of nether ocean dark gold copper ore, and after being purified by a gold immortal's prime true flame, he would be able to obtain 3 kilograms of nether ocean dark gold copper essence. In the hands of a gold immortal, half a kilogram of nether ocean dark gold copper marrow, together with some other supplementary materials, could be used to craft a gold immortal item that had the combination of metal and water energy, a magical item that was infinitely powerful. The total reserves of the nether ocean dark gold copper ore in this mine were about 200 million kilograms. Once all the ores were extracted and purified, they could be used to craft 3 lower-grade gold immortal artifacts. On average, to extract 1 kilogram of ores, about 50 kilograms of rocks and earth had to be excavated. It was a tremendous amount of work. On top of that, the nether ocean dark gold copper ores were formed by the tremendous water pressure in the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. The rocks were very dense, hundreds of times stronger than ordinary steel. Apart from cultivators, no ordinary human could dig through them. Worst of all, the nether ocean dark gold copper ores absorbed natural energy at an insane rate. Wherever there was a nether ocean dark gold copper ore, there was not even a trace of natural energy in the air, as all the natural energy had been sucked away by the ores. As a result, the cultivators who worked here could not even absorb a little bit of natural energy to restore their physical strength. In this mine, all the cultivators had become no different from mortals, except that their physical strength was much stronger than mortals, which allowed them to barely dig through the thick and heavy rocks. Suddenly, a crisp sound rang out from Wu Qi's pickaxe. An ordinary rock was cut open, and a fist-sized ore flew out along with the pickaxe. Nimbly, he grabbed the ore and threw it into the mine cart behind him. The fist-sized ore weighed about 15 kilograms, and a fully loaded cart weighed about 500 kilograms. Every cultivator had to dig a full cart of ores in order to get a day's supply of food and water from the overseeing yikshaws. Without the replenishment of natural energy, even a heaven immortal would feel hungry and thirsty, and would need a large amount of food and water to provide them with enough physical strength to sustain their lives. Even worse, without the replenishment of natural energy, after exhausting all the energy in their bodies, the cultivators could not even run away. Looking at the less than half a cart of ores behind him, Wu Qi touched his chest with his finger, pulled out a stream of water from the spirit breeding ring, and drank it with his head tilted back. There were 10,000 longbow people living in the spirit breeding ring, and Wuqi had prepared a large amount of food and water for them. Considering the huge appetite of longbow people, the food and water stored in the ring was enough for them to enjoy for 1 year, but it was enough for Wuqi to consume for several hundreds of thousands of years. The spirit breeding ring did not have the function of freezing time. After those longbow people were killed by the primordial gold talisman, Wuqi had stored all the food and water into the black dragon's spirit ring, and conveniently hid the ring in his spiritual ocean. He had only stored a small amount of food and water in the spirit breeding ring. When they saw Wuqi take out the water from the ring, the eyes of the nearby cultivators turned green. They gave Wuqi a few glances, then shook their heads. An old cultivator with a white beard sighed and said, "Young man, how many things can you store? These few days are your lucky days, so you better enjoy them. When you have exhausted all your food, water, and energy stones, you will be just like us." He was a cultivator of nascent divinity realm, but now, he did not have any energy left in his body, and his nascent divinity was withered and lifeless like a withered grass. The old man's body was hunched over. Even though he was a nascent divinity cultivator, after losing all of his true inner energy, when faced with heavy physical labor, the old man was just like an ordinary mortal. He became exhausted, and all of his energy was about to be drained. He gave the old cultivator a look, then turned to look at the tens of cultivators in the mine. Without batting an eyelid, he fished out a rolling pancake made by the people of Longbow Kingdom from his spirit breeding ring, a rolling pancake with a diameter of 10 feet and a thickness of 3 inches. With a gentle stroke of his finger, he divided the pancake into tens of portions, then quickly threw them to those cultivators, who had a shocked expression on their faces. Then, he took out tens of clay bottles, filled them with fresh water that was enough for 3 to 5 people to drink for a day, and gave 1 bottle to each of the cultivators. The cultivators were overjoyed, and their faces filled with gratitude as they looked at Wuqi. With these pancakes and fresh water, they could at least survive in this dark mine for another tens of days. Wuqi nodded at them, then continued waving the pickaxe and hammering on the surface of the mine. This was the second day since Wuqi came to this mine, but he still failed to complete the task of bringing out a cart of ores, and still failed to exchange them for the food and water provided by the Yikshaws. But, Wuqi did not care about that. When the Yikshaws began to beat their drums, he threw away the cart and pickaxe, walked out of the mine with the other cultivators, and came to the tens of miles wide mine outside. After walking along an excavated tunnel for a while, they arrived at a huge mine cave. Wuqi walked into the mine together with several thousand cultivators. After walking along the tunnel for tens of miles, they came to a huge cavern that could accommodate more than 10,000 people. Countless stalactites were hanging from the ceiling of the cave, which was about a mile high, and clear water was dripping down from them. A cultivator was extremely thirsty. He raised his head stealthily, opened his mouth slightly, and let a drop of water fall into his mouth. Suddenly, a beam of blue light shot over from a corner. A ferocious-looking female Yikshaw threw out a flying sword and killed the cultivator. The surrounding Yikshaws burst into laughter, clapping and stamping their feet excitedly. Some of them even swayed their hips and danced. The cultivators waited quietly in the cavern. About 15 minutes later, footsteps were heard coming from behind a naturally formed stalactite screen in front of them. Before long, a group of cultivators clad in green Taoist robes walked out of the cavern, escorting an old man, who was clad in a crane cloak and had a long white beard. He looked like an immortal, and had a dignified appearance. Upon seeing the old man, Wuqi quickly bowed his head, and exercised a mystic technique from Scroll of Stealing to slightly adjust his facial features and muscles. He twisted his body slightly, and a cracking sound could be heard coming from his bones, while his height was shortened by 3 inches. Clearly, the old man was Lu Buwei, and Supervisor Lu of Miaoing Palace was him. But, how could he have come here 2 years ago? While Wuqi was having doubts, Lu Buwei was already standing on top of a tall stalactite. With a deep breath, he shouted, "The cultivator who has mined the least ores this month will be executed." A beam of blue light flashed, and a female cultivator, whose face had turned pale with fear, let out a shrill scream. But, as she was about to turn and flee, the blue light caught up with her and swept across her waist, cutting her in half. Lu Buwei nodded and said satisfyingly, "This is the consequence of not working hard." Clearing his throat, Lu Buwei smiled faintly and said, "There are 38 new fellow Taoists joining us this month. I would like to invite the new fellow Taoists to come to the front. Hand over all your magical storage items, flying swords, and magical treasures. Otherwise, don't blame me for being merciless." Amidst the crowd of several thousand cultivators, an evil cultivator with a ferocious-looking face laughed evilly. Suddenly, a dense dark smoke rose from his body, transforming into a bony fiend that sprung into the air and leaped towards Lu Buwei. Wu Qi raised his head and looked at the clump of dark smoke, then turned to look at Lu Buwei from the corner of his eyes. Chapter 489. Standing on top of the stalactite, Lu Buwei stared at the approaching dark smoke fiend with a contemptuous smile on his face. He cupped his fist towards the sky and said, "Goddess, please strike now." A sheet of golden light mixed with a faint purple mist sprinkled down from the sky. The dark smoke and purple mist were enveloped by the golden light, melting away like thin ice flakes in a stream in a valley under the spring sun. Not long after that, they were all gone, leaving not even a tiny bit of impurities in the air. All the cultivators in the crowd who were about to make a move were struck dumb. They stared blankly at the golden light that was slowly dispersing in the air, and felt a chill rush up from the soles of their feet to the top of their heads. It made them shiver, and they no longer had the courage to resist. Lu Buwei sighed lightly, then advised with a sincere and heartfelt voice, "Fellow Taoists, you have to understand what kind of place this is. It has been some time since you came here, and you should have tried it yourself. The restrictive spells here are very tight, and all escape arts are useless here. All the restrictive spells here are personally constructed by senior gold immortals." Lu Buwei's expression changed abruptly. He put on a merciful expression and said with mixed emotions, "Since you are already here, you might as well take things as they come. Goddess Miao Xian has promised that as long as you can mine all the nether ocean dark gold copper in this mine, you will be able to leave this place safely. Isn't that a great thing?" With a solemn expression, Lu Buwei cupped his fist and said with a sigh, "Fellow Taoists, please come forward and hand over all your magical items. I'm just keeping them for you, and I'll definitely return them to you when you leave this place." One after another, the surrounding Yikshaws unleashed their blue sword beams, pointing accurately at Wu Qi and the group of over 30 cultivators who just came to the mine. Wu Qi pondered for a brief moment, then took the lead and walked towards Lu Buwei. His muscles shrunk slightly, and the spirit-breeding ring hanging around his neck quietly disappeared into his body. It was wrapped up by an innate aura, and was hidden deep inside his 7 stealing heaven meridian spirit acupoints. As the inheritor of Scroll of Stealing, not only were they proficient in formations and escape arts, they were also very good at concealing items. Otherwise, if he stole the treasure but it was taken away from him on the spot, wouldn't that ruin his plan and delay his own life? Standing under the stalactite where Lu Buwei was, Wu Qi raised his head, shook his head with a bitter smile, and said with a sigh, "I'm Wu Wang. Senior, look at me, how could I have any magical treasure with me?" Raising his only arm and shaking it, Wu Qi revealed a bitter smile and shook his head helplessly. Lu Buwei's deep gaze swept across Wu Qi's body. Wu Qi's fake nascent soul was destroyed, and his current aura was between that of a Xiantian and a Jin Dan. He was just an ordinary cultivator. His single arm was very eye-catching. It was rare to see such a poor cultivator. After scanning through Wu Qi's body with his divine will, Wu Qi found nothing eye-catching on him, and it was extremely difficult to store any spatial magical treasure, such as a storage ring, into one's body. Only immortals could possess a divine ability like interstitial world. Immediately, Lu Buwei's attention was shifted away from Wu Qi, and he turned to look at the several dozens of cultivators behind him with a cold gaze. A group of over 30 cultivators walked out from the crowd dejectedly, throwing out all their storage magical treasures. Surely, some of them had hidden magical treasures, spirit items, and many other magical treasures in their bodies. However, Lu Buwei did not care about that. Wu Qi knew very well that in a place like this where there were no spirit items in the air, ordinary cultivators could only last for 2 months at most before their energies were completely depleted. Since their energies were completely depleted, what was the point of keeping a few magical treasures and spirit items? With a gold immortal sealing the mine, no ordinary cultivators could escape. Since they couldn't escape, and there was no way to replenish their spiritual energy here, Lu Buwei did not have to worry about what these cultivators could do. As long as he collected everyone's storage rings, he could ensure that nothing would go wrong here. However, if someone had hidden a storage ring, while Wu Qi was thinking about this problem, Lu Buwei laughed and said, "All right, all the fellow Taoists who have just arrived this month have handed over all their storage magical treasures. Now, I'd like to ask the original fellow Taoists to come forward and identify them. If anyone has hidden a storage magical treasure or something that shouldn't be hidden, ha ha ha, as long as the report is true, I'll reward you handsomely." Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat. He jerked his head around, and saw the cultivators from the same mine, whom he had taken pity on and distributed a large amount of food and water to, jump out almost at the same time. Including the pitiful old cultivator, all of them pointed at Wu Qi and said, "Supervisor Lu, this Taoist Wu Wang is hiding something good." The old cultivator shouted impatiently, "He just gave each of us a large piece of flatbread and a large jar of water." Wu Qi clenched his teeth in anger and glared at the dozen cultivators, wishing he could kill them on the spot. However, a faint divine will was lingering in the air above the cave. Wu Qi weighed his current strength, and in the end, he did not dare to make a move. Lu Buwei laughed, then nodded and said, "Somebody, give these fellow Taoists who came forward to report a minor merit." After a slight pause, Lu Buwei looked at the many cultivators below and said with a smile, "Everyone, remember, I'm a strict person who rewards and punishes, and I'm the most reasonable. If you report someone who cheated on you, you will get a minor merit. If you get 10 minor merits, you will get 1 medium grade merit, and if you get 10 medium grade merit, you will get 1 upper grade merit. As long as any fellow Taoist can get 1 upper grade merit, I'll open the front door and send him off." Clapping his hands, Lu Buwei smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists who just came, and fellow Taoists who are already here, what do you think of this method?" Thousands of cultivators applauded and cheered for Chi-Chi as if they had gone mad. They clapped, stamped their feet, and shouted with twisted faces, "Good, good, good. Supervisor Lu is wise and farsighted, and you are very strict in your rewards and punishments. We will obey you." Even the slogans shouted out by these cultivators were exactly the same, and not a single word was changed. Wu Qi felt a chill running down his spine. Had these people been brainwashed by Lu Buwei? How did they become like this? Raising his head to look at Lu Buwei, Wu Qi clenched his jaws tightly. Sure enough, no matter where he ends up, he will never be willing to be left alone. Sooner or later, he will stir up some big trouble. But, Wu Qi was still puzzled. How could Lu Buwei come to Panga continent 2 years ago, and be so unlucky to be captured alive by the people of Miaoying Palace? While Wu Qi was trying to figure out Lu Buwei's background and purpose, Lu Buwei had already turned to look at Wu Qi with a stern gaze. "Fellow Taoist Wu Wang, what else do you want to say? Quickly hand over all your storage Dharma treasures. I won't go too far and won't impose any additional punishment." With a wry smile on his face, Wu Qi gave those cultivators who had reported him a glance, then turned to look at Lu Buwei, breathed out a long sigh, and said, "Supervisor Lu, you're really cunning. Just now, I felt sorry for them, so I gave each of them some flatbread and water. It is the food and water I usually prepare when I go into secluded cultivation. At that time, they gladly accepted my gift, but little did I expect that they would betray me so quickly." Lu Buwei smiled faintly. With both hands raised, he looked down at Wu Qi and said, "Fellow Taoist, this is the nature of the human heart." Lu Buwei's voice was slow and long, filled with an indescribable vicissitudes and frustrations. Staring at Wu Qi, he sighed and said, "Fellow Taoist, please hand over all your storage treasures." I really don't want to be stained with the blood of my fellow Taoists. After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi suddenly cupped his fist and bowed to the sky, then cried out, Wu Wang, may be so bold as to invite Fairy Maiden to descend upon me. I have some meager things here, and I'm willing to offer them to Fairy Maiden as a gift of promotion. Lu Bui's face turned cold abruptly. What are you trying to do? He cried out harshly. An erratic voice drifted down from the sky, Taoist Wu Wang. What things do you have that you dare to offer as a gift of promotion? Wu Qi threw his head back and said, I've encountered a mortal enemy in the outside world. All my magical treasures were destroyed, and one of my arms was chopped off. By chance, I learned from an immortal of Myriad Immortal Alliance that there is a patriarch who has built a temporary palace in the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. I wanted to seek refuge with him, but I was captured alive and brought to this mine by a freak combination of factors. Today, I'm willing to offer you some treasures, just to be your disciple. The voice, which was hard to tell whether it belonged to a man or a woman, came faintly again, That's easy. Let me see what treasure you have first. Clenching his teeth, Wu Qi silently exercised his cultivation technique. A surge of energy surged through his body, and before long, he spat out a jade bottle from his mouth. Carefully, he pointed a finger at the bottle, and a bright light shot up into the sky. Inside the bottle was a fragrant Ganoderma, stacked layer upon layer, emanating an intoxicating fragrance. This fragrant Ganoderma was a genuine gold immortal spirit herb, which Wu Qi found by luck in the passage outside Lady Dark Goldwater's temporary palace. To heaven immortals and cultivators beneath the heaven, the fragrant Ganoderma was a deadly poison. But, to gold immortals, it was a supreme treasure, possessing all sorts of indescribable miraculous functions. Suddenly, 3 loud laughs that could not conceal their joy were heard coming from the void. Is this a fragrant Ganoderma? And it's actually a 100% good treasure? Although you are in a sorry state, you do have a good heart. Well, you don't have to stay in this mine anymore. From now on, you will be my outer sect disciple. You will be in charge of some chores, and if you can pass the test of 1,000 years, you will become an official disciple of Miaoying Palace. Golden light mixed with purple mist sprinkled down from the void. The dozens of cultivators who came forward to report Wu Qi let out miserable howls, and at the same time, large sheets of sticky flame that looked like liquid gold burst out from their bodies. In just a few breaths of time, all these cultivators were burned into a pile of white ash. A dead silence reigned in the surroundings. No one dared to make a sound, and only Wu Qi stood there with a complacent smile on his face. Lu Bui's face twisted. He gave Wu Qi a deep look, then suddenly said, Goddess, you can't accept this man. Wu Qi flew into a rage. He glared at Lu Bui and cried out sternly, Supervisor Lu, what have I done to offend you? The gentle voice was heard coming from the void, It is not up to you to decide whether to accept him or not. Supervisor Lu, just do what you are supposed to do. Don't worry about other things, and don't interrupt. You will only bring disaster to yourself if you are too talkative. After a brief pause, the voice chuckled and said, Wu Wang, from now on, you will be the deputy supervisor of this mine. You will work with Supervisor Lu wholeheartedly. A beam of golden light sprinkled down, wrapping around the fragrant Ganoderma and disappearing without a trace. A green Taoist robe was added to Wu Qi's body, and a heavy medallion made of cold iron was hanging on his waist. Grinning coldly, Wu Qi cupped his fist at Lu Bui and said, Supervisor Lu, please give me your guidance in the future. Lu Bui gave Wu Qi a gloomy look, then spun and left the mine with his men. Chapter 490. A cultivator, who was dragging an iron or cart, tilted his body and fell to the ground with a miserable howl. The tunnel happened to be a downward slope. As he fell, the iron chain slipped off his shoulder, and the cart immediately lost its traction, sliding down along the path it came from. After sliding for over 100 feet, the cart crashed into a rock wall and toppled over. both the cart and the oars fell into a deep ditch at the side of the tunnel. One of the supervising yikshaws let out an angry hiss. He raised his hand and shot a blue light at the cultivator. The blue light went straight for the cultivator's temple. From the looks of it, it was clearly going to pierce through the cultivator's head and take his life. Accompanied by a few yikshaws, Wu Qi, who was standing in a distance and observing the entire mine, suddenly cried out, "Stop it!" The yikshaw was taken aback. Hastily, he waved his hand at the blue beam, but it had already touched the cultivator's skin and left a shallow bloody mark on the cultivator's temple. Blood trickled down the cultivator's cheek, while the blue beam spun and returned to the yikshaw's palm. The yikshaw turned around, cupped his fist at Wu Qi and said, "Deputy manager." Shaking his head, Wu Qi waved his hand and said indifferently, "Let this fellow Taoist have a good rest, and give him some food and water." Looking at the few yikshaws standing next to him, who had puzzled expressions on their faces, Wu Qi breathed out a long sigh and said, "You can kill to your heart's content, but if you kill all the people here, who is going to excavate the ores for us in the future?" The few yikshaws rolled their eyes and exchanged a glance. One of them bent his waist and said carefully, "Deputy manager said that these cultivators must be strictly disciplined. He said that the amount of nether ocean dark gold copper in this mine is limited, and it will take several thousand cultivators several years to excavate it all. On top of that, more and more cultivators are being brought here, so it doesn't matter if some of them are killed or injured." Giving the yikshaw a cold glance, Wu Qi suddenly pulled out the sword hanging on the waist of another yikshaw and chopped off the yikshaw's head. Blue blood spurted out from the broken neck of the yikshaw. The hissing sound of the blood spurting sounded like a fountain. Wu Qi wiped off the blood on his face, then threw the sword to the ground with a clang. Countless cultivators emerged from the surrounding mines, cautiously observing the commotion here. On the other hand, the supervising yikshaws stared at Wu Qi in horror, their huge bodies retreating in panic. Especially the few yikshaws around Wu Qi. They prostrated themselves on the ground and kowtowed repeatedly, loudly begging Wu Qi to spare their lives. Wu Qi raised his single arm high up into the air and cried out in a stern voice, "Fellow Taoists, I don't care why you came to the Northern Ocean, and why you were trapped in this place. But now that I can make the decision here, I can't let another fellow Taoist die for no reason." With a sobbing tone, Wu Qi howled, "Fellow Taoists, you have worked hard for hundreds of years, even thousands of years, to attain the cultivation base you have today. As an immortal cultivator myself, I naturally know how difficult it is to meet dragons and tigers every day, and how difficult it is to refine a tiny bit of energy. Only I know how hard it is for us, the immortal cultivators, to endure until now." A gleam flickered in the gray eyes of those cultivators, and a strange life force suddenly emerged from their numb bodies. "I was lucky enough to be accepted by Goddess Meng as my disciple. Although I am just an outer sect disciple, I am also the deputy supervisor of this mine. Today, I'll be so bold as to promise that as long as you work hard every day, food and drink will be provided freely, and all my fellow Taoists will have their fill. Fellow Taoists, just do your best and work hard. Once all the mineral veins in this mine have been excavated, I'll definitely urge Supervisor Lu to fulfill his promise." After a brief pause, Wu Qi cried out, "From today onwards, Supervisor yikshaws are not allowed to kill anyone. Whoever dares to do so, I'll definitely take his life." One after another, the yikshaws dropped to their knees and answered respectfully. The several thousand trapped cultivators were stunned for a moment. Then, someone became the first to cheer. Immediately after that, the other cultivators began clapping and cheering. Some even jumped up in excitement. For a time, the sounds of cheering caused the entire mine to tremble. Everyone's cheeks were flushed with excitement. Especially the cultivators who were saved by Wu Qi just now, they dropped to their knees in the mine with tears of gratitude, kowtowing to Wu Qi again and again. Looking at the thousands of cultivators who were cheering and jumping with joy, Wu Qi just smiled faintly. Lu Bue was like the dark night above the graveyard, ruling over these cultivators with endless terror and the threat of death. On the other hand, Wu Qi had maliciously torn a large hole on the dark curtain that Lu Buwei had purposely constructed, allowing a faint ray of light to shine through. First, Wu Qi had gained the gratitude of these cultivators. Among these cultivators, there were bound to be some who still had a conscience. Perhaps, Wu Qi could recruit them, and in the future, they could become his power. Second, Wu Qi had ruined some of Lu Buwei's plans. No matter what Lu Buwei wanted to do, Wu Qi would just have to fight him head-on. Third, Lu Buwei would always respond to Wu Qi's blatant interference. Once a conflict broke out between Lu Buwei and Wu Qi, regardless of whether the conflict was good or bad, it would definitely reach Goddess Miao Xian's ears. And Wu Qi had a feeling that Goddess Miao Xian would be very happy to see Wu Qi making such a ruckus. This was the third day since Wu Qi came to this mine, and he had already begun to deliberately break the rules set by Lu Buwei. Flying before the cultivator who kept kowtowing, Wu Qi helped him up, patted his shoulder, and said with a deep voice of encouragement, "Fellow Taoist, hang in there. I promise you, as long as I can still have a tiny bit of power in this mine, I'll never let any fellow Taoist die unjustly." The cheers of the surrounding cultivators grew louder and louder. Wu Qi waved his single arm and greeted the surrounding cultivators. After that, he glared at those yikshaws and roared, "What are you waiting for? Go prepare some food and water. Hurry up. In the future, if any fellow Taoist needs some water, bring it to him quickly. If any fellow Taoist's only son is hungry, bring it to him quickly. If any fellow Taoist has a headache or fever, you will be the filial son and grandson, and show me your utmost respect." One after another, all the cultivators stuck out their chests. Half of them looked gratefully at Wu Qi, while the other half looked disdainfully at those yikshaws who were kneeling on the ground and dared not to raise their heads. Amidst Wu Qi's loud scolding, these yikshaws ran out of the mine in a sorry state. Before long, they returned with a great amount of clean water, as well as food made from seaweed, fish, and some other raw materials, which they distributed to all the cultivators in the mine. A few exquisite stone caves were excavated in the mine. Some were built on the left and right sides, and some were built in the front and back. The interior of the caves was well furnished, with stone tables, stone chairs, and stone beds. There were even bookshelves carved into the walls, placed on top of which were a few books that introduced the topography of the dark abyss of Northern Ocean, as well as various local specialties and customs. These caves were for the use of Lu Buwei's disciples who were in charge of managing the mine. From time to time, these disciples would come to the mine to supervise the work of the cultivators. Since they were the disciples of Miao Ying Palace, the treatment they received was definitely not the same as the cultivators. As such, these stone caves were equipped with all kinds of living facilities, and that was the enjoyment they deserved. After ordering the yikshaws to provide sufficient food and water to the cultivators, Wu Qi chose a stone cave that was furnished with the most luxurious furnishings. He lay on a stone bed with his limbs spread out, reading the books provided in the cave. These books were compiled by Miao Ying Palace herself, and they were filled with detailed information, even including the topography of the north, northwest, and northeast of the dark abyss of Northern Ocean. According to the books, the north of the dark abyss of Northern Ocean had become a large and densely populated province. Right behind it, the distance between the two provinces was about the same as the distance between Zhong Province and Northern Ocean. It was the administrative center of Feng Province, another first-grade province of Diyu. However, as the distance was too far, there were not many interactions between Feng Province and Zhong Province. The mortals never had any contact with each other for generations, and the cultivators who came to Pangu continent rarely traveled between the two provinces. Apart from those merchants who went to Ling Ao Island to purchase aquatic treasures, few cultivators were willing to take a stroll around the dark abyss of Northern Ocean. It was not a friendly place. Word by word, Wu Qi memorized all the information in the books. Right after he finished flipping through a few of them, he heard a series of rapid footsteps coming from outside the cave where Wu Qi was. Lu Buwei's face turned blue with anger. Together with a group of green-clothed Taoists, they rushed into the cave and pushed the door open forcefully with a palm strike. Deputy Supervisor, cried Lu Buwei, focusing on the Deputy Supervisor. Supervisor Lu. Lazily, Wu Qi rose to his feet and threw the book in his hand onto the stone bed. Tilting his head, he stared at Lu Buwei and said with a cold grin, I thought Supervisor Lu only comes down here once a month to search for treasures. Why are you here again today after leaving yesterday? Lu Buwei took a few steps closer to Wu Qi, pointing his finger at Wu Qi as he snapped, How dare you? How dare you break the iron rule I've set? Wu Qi rose to his feet, staring at Lu Buwei fearlessly as he sneered and said, What kind of bullshit rule is that? I don't like it. You are intentionally harming all the fellow Taoists under the heaven. Although I'm not a good man, I do have a kind heart. Supervisor Lu, could it be that you are a demon immortal who has cultivated from a jackal, wolf, tiger, or leopard? Otherwise, how could you be so cold-hearted and use all sorts of methods to kill your fellow Taoists? The expression on Lu Buwei's face turned even more unsightly. What a compassionate deputy supervisor, he said with a cold grin on his face. After letting out 3 wild laughs, Lu Buwei spun and left. Behind him, all the executing disciples gave Wu Qi a pitying look, then turned and followed behind Lu Buwei. When Wu Qi came to the entrance of the cave, he smiled and waved at Lu Buwei, saying, Take care, supervisor. Be careful. Wu Qi's laughter was loud, but his eyes were filled with a cold gleam, without the slightest warmth. He raised his head and looked at those supervising yakshas, who lowered their heads in fear and bowed to Wu Qi. On the 2nd and 3rd day, Lu Buwei did not show up, but from time to time, a few of his disciples would come to the mine and show their faces. On the 4th day, the leader of the supervising yakshas came to Wu Qi with a timid look on his face, whispering a few words to him. Deputy Supervisor, the output of ores has dropped by 2 times in the last few days, and is now less than 30% of what it used to be. If this goes on, all of us will be severely punished by Elder Miao Xian. It doesn't matter that you've contributed some spirit herbs and immortal herbs to Elder Miao Xian, but we are dead meat. The Yiksha leader dropped to his knees, kowtowing and begging Wu Qi. Wu Qi was taken aback. His face turned blue as he cried out sternly, Gather everyone. I'll give you the time to finish a pot of tea. Immediately, several thousand cultivators rushed out from the surrounding mines. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.